Hey, Judy, what's wrong? It's nothing, I reply. It's a cold day in December, and Christmas music fills the streets. I pause to admire a shiny tree ornament. My husband, Dan, walks a few steps ahead, his breath fogging the air. He turns back, smiling softly at me, his ears red from the chill. I adore the way he looks at me. I think to myself. Let's go home. I made hot stew for dinner, it's perfect for a cold night. That sounds great, he says. We hold hands, laughing, as we walk home. A familiar Christmas song drifts through the air. I'm Judy, I say. What I'm about to share is a strange Christmas miracle I experienced a few years ago, and the events that led to it. You're late, Dan snaps as I walk into the apartment. His sharp words make me cringe. Where have you been? I just went to the nearest deli to grab the hot sauce we ran out of. It was a freezing day in mid-December, and just a short while ago, he'd sent me out into the cold without my coat. Do you think I'm a fool? I work hard to pay the bills. When I come home, I expect dinner to be ready and perfect. Can't you even handle that? I stare at the floor as he rants. No hot sauce? How am I supposed to eat chicken wings without it? And why do you always look so lazy? You're messing everything up. I'd hurried out earlier, bought the sauce, and rushed back, but now he's even angrier. You went to a deli? Are you crazy? It's cheaper at the supermarket. He glares at me, pointing at the bottle like it's some kind of crime. I can't help but answer back. The supermarket's farther away, and the food would have gone cold. I didn't have time for that. Besides, the chicken wings tasted fine even without the sauce. Are you seriously talking back to me? He roars. Where's your apology? I already said I'm sorry. But my response only fuels his rage. He shouts at me for another hour before flipping his plate of chicken wings and storming out to eat elsewhere. A few days later, I visited my childhood neighborhood to clean my parents' house, which was up for sale. I stopped by to see an elderly woman I've always called Grandma. Grandma, your predictions have always been right, until now, I tease her. I don't make predictions, she says with a mysterious smile. But you do, I insist, laughing. You've always known what's going to happen, like when you told me not to go to the mall, and later that day, lightning struck it, or when you told me to go outside on a sunny day, and my house was robbed while I was out. If I'd been home, I might have been hurt, or worse. Grandma just chuckles, brushing it off. I pause, my tone growing serious. You even helped me prepare for my mom's illness. Your advice gave her peace of mind before she passed. She told me you said I'd have something wonderful happen on a Christmas not too far away. It made her happy to think I'd have a bright future. I think back to how Dan proposed to me on Christmas Day, believing it was the special moment Grandma predicted. But now, I feel stuck. Dan has changed so much since we got married. He gets angry over little things, like the temperature of the food or how I clean. He criticizes everything I do, leaving me feeling small and trapped. I don't even want to go home, I admit to Grandma, my voice cracking. Now, she says gently, it's getting late. Don't you need to cook dinner? Her words feel like a soft nudge, but they still sting. I stand up reluctantly. You'll be okay, she says. Just stand your ground and stay true to yourself. Life will get better. One day, you'll have a Christmas so joyful you'll feel like jumping for joy. God is watching. Her words lighten my heart just a little. Is that a prophecy? I ask, turning back to her. Grandma smiles mysteriously. Let's just say I'm an old woman sharing wisdom. On my way home, I try to shake off my doubts. If I work harder, maybe Dan will change, I tell myself, but things only get worse. It became normal for Dan to bark orders at me, make dinner, give me a massage, iron my shirt. He never said a kind word, only criticism. One night, his temper flared up again. Who do you think you are? He snapped. Why, what did I do? I asked, confused and weary. But once again, I was left questioning why this marriage had turned into a constant storm of anger and hurt. You don't even have the decency to greet me when I get home, Dan yelled as soon as he walked in. Who do you think you are, staying out so late? Now I have to heat up my food in the microwave. God darn you. I sighed deeply. I told you I had a co-op meeting tonight. I even left a note on the table. Shut up. That's no excuse for lazy cooking, he snapped. Lazy? What are you talking about? I made the main dish and all the sides, just like always, I replied, trying to stay calm. If it's not freshly cooked, it's cutting corners, he barked back. His reasoning was ridiculous. I should always come first. Above anyone or anything. I've been putting up with you. You're my wife, you're supposed to obey me. That's insane, I blurted, shocked by his entitled demands, but he stood tall, puffed up with self-importance, and sneered at me. You have no family, no one else to rely on, you can't survive on your own, you're nothing without me, you should shut up and worship me. If you can't do that, I'll divorce you, he said, smirking like he enjoyed breaking me down. Then he sat down and ordered, now, give me a foot massage. I bit back my frustration, holding myself together as best I could. If I fought back, it would only make things worse, and most importantly, I had nowhere else to go, not in the freezing sleet outside. So, I sat on the floor and gave him the massage, swallowing my pride like I had so many times before. This cycle went on until one day, while grocery shopping, I suddenly collapsed from intense pain. An ambulance rushed me to the hospital. When the doctor explained my condition, I couldn't make sense of it at first. This virus is transmitted through sexual contact, the doctor said gently. Your husband was also tested, and both of you have it. You probably didn't notice, because you had no symptoms. Unfortunately, you'll need surgery, and I'm very sorry to tell you this, but your chances of having children in the future are extremely slim. The words hit me like a freight train, my mind went blank. Dan quickly followed the doctor out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I can't have a baby, I whispered to myself, over and over, as the weight of it sank in. Slowly, the shock turned into an overwhelming darkness inside me. I needed answers. Forcing myself to stand on unsteady legs, I tried to follow them. Wait, doctor, Dan, I called out, but I froze mid-step when I overheard their conversation. And in that moment, I realized something that would change everything. So, does everyone need to get tested? Exactly, they all need treatment at once, or it'll just keep coming back to you, the doctor explained. Do they even know what the test is for? Dan asked, his voice persistent. Of course they do, the doctor replied, clearly getting annoyed with him. I sat quietly, feeling hopeless. As I listened to their conversation, it became clear that Dan had been seeing at least 3 different women while we were married. I looked at a picture of my mom on the wall and whispered, I need help. I know he's not a good husband now, but maybe he'll change if we have a baby. I tried to hold on to Grandma's words. I would struggle now, but eventually, I'd be happy. I thought they would be my good luck charm, but I was wrong. Dan didn't seem to care about me at all. He was always focused on his own health, going to the hospital for his checkups, while I suffered in silence. I longed for a family of my own, a husband, kids, and a home. Tears streamed down my face as I held the picture of my mom. Mom, I sobbed quietly. Suddenly, Dan appeared. What are you sitting around for? Dinner's not ready. He threw papers on my head as I sat there. These are divorce papers, he said, his voice cold. This is your punishment for ignoring me and making a fuss. You're so depressing, he sneered. I'm ready to divorce you anytime. You're the one who will suffer, not me. If you don't want that, start doing your duty. I'm not slacking, I mumbled, too tired to argue anymore. Oh, there's one more thing, no living expenses for you this month, he added with a smirk. He stepped closer. I'm giving you a chance to reflect, know your place. If you don't obey me, it's over. Once he finished his rant, he left the room, looking satisfied with himself. Divorce. The word hung in the air, my emotions numbed as my eyes fell on the papers with Dan's signature. Mom, I've decided, I whispered, wiping away my tears. I looked at her smiling picture. Please watch over me. For a while, I stayed quiet, living with Dan as usual. He treated me like a servant, taking out his anger on me. I argued sometimes, but mostly, I endured the silence. And one day, as he began another tantrum, I knew it was time to act. I told you already, I can't eat lukewarm salad, and cold stew? Forget it. How long does it take for you to get it right? I sighed inside, then decided to follow through with my plan. If I don't obey, you'll divorce me, right? Right, at least you remember that. If you don't want me to leave, you better fix your stupidity. He leaned back, satisfied with himself. You're a bit slow, aren't you? What? He blinked in surprise at my response. What did you just say? You say the same things over and over. Do you even know any other words? All you ever say is divorce. It's sad, really. What the heck? Let's get a divorce. I'm fine with it. I'll be a stranger to you, just like you want. His jaw dropped in disbelief. Are you serious? I smiled calmly and said, goodbye. I took off the apron I had bought when we got married, folded it, and placed it on the table with the house keys on top. I looked at him one last time before picking up my pre-packed suitcase and walking out the door. What the heck is going on? His voice chased after me, snapping me out of my thoughts, but I couldn't care less. Yay, I'm free. I pretended not to hear him and happily walked towards my parents' house, where I had decided to move back in. 1 year later. The divorce was final, but Dan didn't stop contacting me. You're sorry, aren't you? I'll take you back if you apologize. A wife should. I ignored the constant messages, which were something I never had to deal with when we were married. Eventually, after he kept pushing, I agreed to meet him face to face at his parents' house. Why have you been ignoring me? Dan, who was trying to act calm in front of his parents, spoke reasonably. I've been texting you all this time, but you never replied. Oh, yeah, I turned off notifications from you. Why? It was too annoying. I am annoying? Yes, you are. His face started turning red as his anger built up. So, what do you want to talk to me about? He started raising his voice, but then remembered where we were and quickly muttered an apology, something that had never happened in our marriage. Wow, I thought, he actually knows how to apologize. What do you need to talk to your ex-wife about? I asked, curious. Hold on, why are you acting so strange? Aren't you struggling after the divorce? How are you managing? He sounded almost concerned, but I couldn't forget how he never even checked on me before, even though he knew where I lived. I didn't mind getting back together if that's what you want. Doesn't that make you happy? Not at all. I almost laughed at his confidence. It doesn't make me happy, and it wouldn't help me. I make enough money to support myself. Besides, the living expenses you gave me were only $500 a month. It didn't even cover what we needed. You're the one struggling now, without me, right? The money I was covering for you is gone, and I'm much more comfortable being alone now. I don't understand why we'd get back together after I've finally been free, I said, pretending to be confused. Dan got visibly frustrated. What? You were supposed to be a housewife. I mean, let's not talk about finances, he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable with his parents being there. Dan, stop acting like a child caught in trouble. Calm down. Don't try to look good now. They know everything about you. What secrets? He asked. I motioned for him to be quiet and revealed the truth. You're wrong about me. I wasn't just a housewife. I told you I lived abroad because of my dad's job. I used the German I learned there to work as a translator. Do you remember those materials on the bookshelves? I didn't care about them, he muttered. Exactly. Those were materials and manuscripts for translation. You never touched them because you didn't care. Thanks to that, I hid some recording equipment. Wait. Dan froze when I mentioned the word recording. It was his father who presented the evidence, a recording device and files, right in front of him. See, all your secrets, like how you treated her, are out now, his father said. His parents started crying as they watched the recordings and apologized to me. They were ashamed of how their son treated me. Well. Dan stammered, clearly nervous under the pressure. His mother grabbed him and forced him to sit down again. She glanced at me, signaling for me to continue, and I nodded. These are copies of our divorce papers, I said, pointing to parts marked with red circles. You know what these are, right? No way. He whispered, shocked. I showed him the witness signatures on the papers, people he knew very well. Actually, there wasn't enough space for all the witnesses. You had more than 2 girlfriends, didn't you? Wait a second. No more waiting, I interrupted. Before I could continue, a voice full of resentment filled the room. You never told us about the STD. We only had a relationship with you. That means you brought it in from somewhere else, didn't you? I mean, what am I, a fling? Didn't you say we'd get married one day? That's something only a bachelor should say. Oh no, one of his girlfriends added, her voice full of contempt. We watched the video too. You're a villain, not just to us, but to all women. You're public enemy number 1. You're finished. Surrounded by his angry girlfriends, Dan collapsed to the floor. His parents sighed deeply, ashamed of their son. I had hired a private investigator to look into his girlfriends and had secretly contacted them. I also informed my ex-in-laws about everything. The result was this chaos. Your game is up now, Dan. His parents strongly insisted that he face the consequences. All of his girlfriends and I demanded compensation from him. Dan worked for a company owned by a relative of his mother, so the payments were taken directly from his paycheck. To make sure he couldn't escape, he was kept under strict supervision at his parents' house while facing years of compensation payments. 6 years had passed since everything had changed. "Hey, Judy, what's wrong?" It was a cold day, with Christmas songs playing everywhere in the city. I stopped in front of a tree ornament that caught my eye. My husband, his breath visible in the chilly air, turned to look at me from a few steps ahead. He smiled softly, his ears red from the cold. The little girl in his arms had rosy cheeks too. I couldn't help but adore them both. Grandma's prediction was actually amazing, I murmured to myself. My current husband, surprisingly, was the brother of one of Dan's ex-girlfriends. After everything, I had stayed in touch with the girlfriends, and it was through them that I met him. He had gently helped me heal from the depression I'd suffered after my painful marriage to Dan. It felt like a strange, almost fateful twist of events. If it hadn't been for everything with Dan, I never would have met my husband. So that's what Grandma meant when she said, "You'll struggle, but you'll be happy." I reflected again, amazed at how true her words had turned out to be. And, against all odds, I had gotten pregnant after we married, something I had been told was highly unlikely. I still remember the Christmas day when I was rushed to the emergency room and the doctor announced that I was pregnant. We were overjoyed, jumping up and down like kids, and the nurse scolded us to calm down. It felt like a true Christmas miracle. This time of year always brought those memories rushing back. I had been hurt deeply by Dan, but now, I was so happy. "Mommy." I was brought back from my thoughts as my daughter left my husband's arms and ran to me in her fuzzy coat. "Nothing, let's go home and have dinner. It's hot stew for an especially cold day, I've already prepared it." "Sounds great." "Yay." Laughing, we held hands and walked down the street together. And from somewhere, a familiar Christmas song played in the background.
The morning everything changed, I was wearing my grandmother's pearls and a dark blue dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Not that anyone in Davidson and Mitchell Law noticed. To them, I was just Sophia Barrett, the efficient but unremarkable executive secretary who'd been managing their office for the past 8 years. If they'd bothered to look closer, they might have wondered why someone with an MBA from Wharton and a real estate empire worth 9 figures was just anything. But people see what they expect to see, and Jeffrey Davidson had always expected to see nothing more than a secretary. I straightened papers on my desk, solid mahogany that had been here longer than most of the junior partners, and reviewed the morning schedule. Board meeting at 9:00 a.m., where they'd be discussing the firm's expansion plans. Plans I'd helped craft, though my name appeared nowhere on the proposals. "Coffee, Sophia," Jeffrey called as he swept past my desk, our manna soup perfectly pressed, ego perfectly inflated. "The good stuff, not that break room garbage. And make sure the Harrison files are ready for the meeting." I smiled politely. "Of course, Mr. Davidson." I'd already prepared both, along with a detailed analysis of their latest acquisition target. Analysis that would somehow become Jeffrey's brilliant insight by the end of the meeting. What Jeffrey didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the last 3 years quietly buying up the commercial real estate around their precious law firm. Building by building, through various shell companies and investment trusts, I'd assembled a portfolio that included not just their office tower, but half the prime properties in downtown Seattle. The previous building owner, old Mr. Matthews, had been looking for a quiet sale. Someone who maintained the property's integrity rather than flip it for quick profit. We closed the deal over dinner at my penthouse last week, sharing stories about how many people underestimated us both. Ms. Barrett, Andrea, one of the young paralegals, appeared at my desk looking nervous. The promotion committee wanted me to deliver this. She handed me an envelope, her expression sympathetic. I already knew what it contained. I'd seen the committee's notes, heard their dismissive comments. Just a secretary, they'd said. Competent but not partner material. Inside was a form letter, thanking me for my interest in the junior partner position, but regretfully informing me that they'd chosen to go in another direction. That direction, I knew, was Bradley Thompson II, fresh out of law school with mediocre grades but excellent family connections. "Thank you, Andrea," I said, tucking the letter into my desk drawer. She lingered, clearly wanting to say more. It's not fair, she finally burst out. You basically run this place. Everyone knows it. I met her eyes, seeing in them the same fire I'd had at her age. Life rarely is fair, Andrea. But it is interesting. The board meeting started precisely at 9:00 a.m. I sat in my usual corner, taking notes while the partners discussed their grand plans for expansion. They needed another floor, they decided. The firm was growing, and their current space wouldn't suffice. Jeffrey leaned back in his chair, confident as always. I'll talk to building management, see if we can negotiate something reasonable. I made a note in my leather-bound notebook, my handwriting precise and unhurried. In 3 days, they'd learned that building management had changed, that their lease, up for renewal next month, was now under new ownership. The meeting continued, partners pontificating about market dominance and growth strategies. I recorded it all, adding my own observations in a simple cipher I developed years ago. Knowledge, after all, was power. And I had 8 years of knowledge about every deal, every client, every secret that passed through these walls. At lunch, Jeffrey called me into his office. The rejection letter sat on his desk. Sophia, he said, not bothering to look up from his phone. About your application, I trust you understand our decision. I stood quietly, hands clasped in front of me. Of course, Mr. Davidson. It's nothing personal. You're excellent at what you do. Invaluable, really. But partner? That's not really your place. I watched him, this man who thought he held all the cards, who believed his position at the top was unassailable. And what exactly is my place, Mr. Davidson? He looked up then, irritation flickering across his features. Don't be difficult, Sophia. You're a secretary, a very good one, but still just a secretary. Know your place and stay in it. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with condescension. I smiled, the same pleasant, professional smile I'd worn for 8 years. Thank you for the clarity, Mr. Davidson. Will there be anything else? He waved me away, already forgetting our conversation. I returned to my desk and opened my private email. 3 messages waited, one from my property management company, one from my investment advisor, and one from Mr. Matthews confirming the final transfer of ownership. I responded to each one, my fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they'd learn what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. That evening, as the office emptied, I stayed late as usual. But instead of managing the firm's paperwork, I prepared for my own transformation. I reviewed the new lease terms I had drawn up, significantly higher than the current rate, but still just below market value. Just enough to hurt without being legally actionable. I also prepared letters to each of the firm's top clients whose relationships I'd quietly nurtured over the years. Letters explaining my departure and my new venture, a boutique legal consulting firm specializing in the exact type of work Davidson and Mitchell handled. Andrea stopped by my desk on her way out. Don't let them get to you, she said softly. You're worth 10 of them. I looked up at her, this bright young woman with dreams bigger than her current position. Andrea, would you be interested in joining me for coffee tomorrow morning? I have a proposition you might find interesting. She brightened. Really? Yes, absolutely. Excellent. And Andrea, don't mention this to anyone else. Not yet. After she left, I walked to the window and looked out over the Seattle skyline. 8 years I played this role, building my empire in secret, while they dismissed me as just a secretary. Tomorrow, they'd learn that sometimes the real power isn't in a corner office. It's at the desk right outside it. I gathered my things, including the small brass nameplate that had sat on my desk all these years. I wouldn't need it anymore. Tomorrow, I'd have a new nameplate on a new door in my building. As I walked out, Jeffrey was still in his office, probably working on the expansion proposal. He didn't look up as I passed. He never did. Good night, Mr. Davidson, I called out, my voice perfectly pleasant. Night, Sophia, he replied absently, not knowing it was the last time he casually dismissed me. Tomorrow would change everything, and I couldn't wait to see his face when he realized just how badly he'd underestimated his just a secretary. I arrived at La Maison Cafe at precisely 7:30 am, early enough to secure the corner table with the view of Davidson and Mitchell's building, my building. Andrea was already waiting, nervously stirring her cappuccino. Thanks for meeting me, I said, setting down my Hermes bag, a quiet indulgence I'd always downplayed at the office. I trust you haven't mentioned this to anyone? She shook her head. No, but something's happening, isn't it? You seem different today. I smiled, pulling out a folder embossed with a new logo. Barrett Strategic Consulting. How would you like to be my first employee? Starting salary twice what you're making now, plus equity in the company. Her eyes widened as she looked at the contract. But how? I mean, yesterday you were just a secretary. I finished for her, amused. Andrea, that's lesson 1. Never be what others expect you to be. While they were busy underestimating me, I built something of my own. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from my property management company, new lease terms delivered to Davidson and Mitchell. Meeting requested immediately. Perfect timing. I looked back at Andrea. You don't have to decide right now, but I get to the office early today. It's going to be interesting. By 8:45 a.m., chaos had erupted at Davidson and Mitchell. I walked through the lobby, my lobby, to find Jeffrey Davidson in a heated argument with the building's management representative. This is impossible, he was saying, waving papers in the air. The rent can't just double overnight. Who the hell is this new owner? I passed by silently, taking my usual place at my desk. For now, the morning board meeting had been hastily rescheduled to address the rental crisis. I sat in my corner, notebook ready, watching the partners file in. Their faces were tight with worry, their usual confidence replaced by confusion and fear. This is outrageous, Jeffrey began, standing at the head of the table. Some mystery buyer has acquired the building and is trying to force us out with these ridiculous terms. We need options, people. We could look at other properties, Bradley Thompson Ayala suggested, shooting a smug glance my way. He'd been particularly pleased about getting the promotion over me. In this market, another partner scoffed. Everything comparable is either occupied or even more expensive. Plus, moving would cost a fortune. What about legal action? Jeffrey demanded. There must be something. Actually, I said quietly, speaking up for the first time in 8 years of board meetings. The new terms are completely legal. I made sure of that. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. You? What? Jeffrey asked, his face reddening. I stood smoothing my designer dress. No more hiding my success in modest outfits. The new owner reviewed all options carefully before setting the new terms. Everything is well within market rates and legal parameters. How would you know that? Bradley sneered. I smiled, reaching into my bag for a stack of documents. Because, Mr. Thompson, I am the new owner, not just of this building, but of the entire block, and several others downtown. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear their minds racing, re-evaluating every interaction, every dismissive comment, every time they called me just a secretary. That's impossible, Jeffrey sputtered. You're a secretary? No, Mr. Davidson. I was pretending to be a secretary while building my real estate empire. There's a difference. I began distributing the documents. These are your options. Option 1. Accept the new lease terms, effective immediately. Option 2. Vacate the premises within 60 days as per the original lease agreement. Bradley jumped up. This is blackmail. This is business, I corrected him. The same business you claimed I wasn't qualified to participate in when you denied my partnership application. One of the senior partners, Elizabeth Chen, had been studying me with newfound respect. How long? She asked quietly. How long have you owned? 3 years for my first building, I replied. This one officially became mine last week. Perfect timing, wouldn't you say? Jeffrey had collapsed into his chair, his face ashen. Why? He managed. Why work as a secretary if you owned? Knowledge is power, Mr. Davidson. You taught me that, though not in the way you intended. Every client meeting, every deal, every secret that passed through this office, I learned from all of it, built on it. While you were busy looking down on me, I was looking at the bigger picture. I walked to the window, my window now, and gazed out at the city skyline. By the way, I'm resigning, effective immediately, though I suspect you figured that out. You can't do this, Jeffrey said, but his voice had lost its usual authority. We'll fight it. I turned back to face them. You can try, but consider this. I know every weakness in this firm, every ethical gray area, every questionable decision, every client you've overcharged or underserved. I've documented it all. I patted my notebook. 8 years of notes, gentlemen. Care to test how detailed they are? The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. They could fight me, but they wouldn't win. Elizabeth Chen stood up. I'd like to speak with Ms. Barrett privately, she announced, and I suggest the rest of you start seriously considering those options she presented. As the others filed out, looking shell-shocked, Andrea appeared at the door. She was carrying a box of her belongings. I quit, she announced, grinning. I'm accepting that job offer, Ms. Barrett, if it's still open. It absolutely is, I replied. And please call me Sophia. The rest of that morning passed in a blur of activity. Word spread quickly through the office. The quiet secretary, who'd been invisible for so long, was suddenly the most powerful person in the building, literally. By lunch, 3 more employees had resigned to join my new venture. By afternoon, 2 of Davidson and Mitchell's biggest clients had requested meetings with me. I sat in my old desk one last time, watching Jeffrey pace in his office, making frantic phone calls. He tried calling his own real estate contacts, only to discover I owned most of the suitable properties in the area. He tried threatening legal action, only to have his own attorneys remind him of how much I knew about the firm's operations. He even tried appealing to my sympathy, sending Elizabeth to negotiate. But I'd spent 8 years being sympathetic. Now it was time for something else. As the day drew to a close, I stood to leave. Jeffrey stepped out of his office, looking somehow older than he had that morning. Sophia, he called out, his voice strained. Please, let's discuss this reasonably. I paused, turning to face him. Reasonable? Like how you reasonably explained that I should know my place. He flinched. I was wrong. Obviously, I was wrong about you. We can fix this, make you a partner, give you whatever position you want. Oh, Mr. Davidson, I said softly, you still don't understand. I don't want a position in your firm. I want your firm to be a tenant in my building, and now it is. I picked up my bag and headed for the elevator. Behind me, I heard him call out one last time. What happens now? I stepped into the elevator, turning to face him. Now you learn what it feels like to not be in control. The new lease terms are due signed by tomorrow at noon. Don't be late. I hear the new owner is quite strict about deadlines. The doors closed on his stunned face, and I smiled. The day wasn't over yet. I had a dinner meeting with Elizabeth Chen, who had expressed interest in joining my new venture, and tomorrow, the real changes would begin. 1 month after my resignation from Davidson and Mitchell, I sat in my new office on the top floor of the Barrett Tower, formerly known as the Matthews Building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, including the 6 other properties I owned in the downtown core. Andrea knocked and entered, tablet in hand. The Davidson and Mitchell partners are here for the lease negotiation. Should I make them wait? I glanced at the antique clock on my wall. A piece I bought at auction years ago, but kept in storage until now. They were 7 minutes early, desperately trying to show good faith. Give them 5 minutes, I replied, adjusting my channel jacket. Let them remember how it feels to wait outside someone else's office. My new headquarters occupied the entire top floor, designed with the quiet elegance I'd always appreciated but never flaunted. The reception area featured original artwork from local artists I'd been supporting anonymously for years. The conference room showcased views of Elliott Bay. Everything spoke of old money and established power, the kind of power that didn't need to shout to be heard. When I finally allowed them in, Jeffrey Davidson looked like he aged years and weeks. Bradley Thompson II had lost his smug smile, and the other partners filed in with the wary respect of people who'd learned a harsh lesson about underestimating others. Thank you for coming, I said, not rising from my desk. Please take a seat. They arranged themselves around the conference table, the same one I'd sat beside for 8 years, taking notes while they ignored my presence. I bought it in the liquidation sale when Davidson and Mitchell downsized to half their former space, unable to afford the new rent. Ms. Barrett, Jeffrey began, his voice carefully neutral. We've reviewed your latest proposal. And? It's aggressive. But we're prepared to accept the terms with some modifications. I opened the leather portfolio in front of me, my grandmother's, the same one I used as their secretary. Modifications? Like the ones you suggested to the Harrison contract last year, the ones that walked the line of legal malpractice? They shifted uncomfortably. Elizabeth Chen, who had indeed joined my new venture as lead counsel, smiled slightly from her seat beside me. That's not relevant to these negotiations, Bradley interjected, trying to sound authoritative. Everything is relevant, Mr. Thompson. That's something you learn when you pay attention instead of relying on family connections. I let that sink in before continuing, but you're right, let's focus on the present. I pressed a button on my desk, and a screen descended from the ceiling. These are your current financials. Notice the pattern. Client retention down 40%, revenue dropped 35% last quarter, and 3 more partners are considering departure. How did you get this information? Jeffrey demanded. I smiled. The same way I got everything else, by being invisible while you were being careless. But that's not important right now. What's important is your future, or rather, if you'll have one. Elizabeth handed each of them a new document. This is our final offer. The rent stays as is, but we're willing to offer a longer-term lease, with conditions. They read in silence, faces growing paler with each page. This is impossible, Jeffrey finally said. You want a controlling interest in Davidson and Mitchell? Not want, Mr. Davidson. Have. Check the fine print of your partnership agreement, the one I helped draft 8 years ago. Your firm's debt ratio now exceeds the stability threshold. As your primary creditor, through various holdings, I can exercise the conversion option. The room erupted in chaos. Partners talking over each other, papers being shuffled, faces reddening with anger and fear. I let them vent for exactly 1 minute before raising my hand. The silence that followed was immediate. They'd learned at least that much. Gentlemen, let me be clear. Your firm is failing. Not because I raised the rent, but because you never understood what made you successful in the first place. It wasn't your name on the door or your expensive suits. It was the people you overlooked, the ones who actually did the work while you took the credit. I stood walking to the window. I'm offering you a chance to survive, to become part of something bigger. Barrett Strategic Holdings isn't just a real estate company. We're redefining how business is done in this city. By taking over your former employers, Bradley asked bitterly. No, Mr. Thompson. By recognizing talent wherever it exists, by building something that values substance over status. I turned back to face them. Elizabeth left your firm to join me. So did Andrea and 17 other employees. Want to know why? None of them spoke. Because I saw them. All those years while you were ignoring us, we were building relationships, supporting each other, creating a network that now spans every major company in Seattle. My phone buzzed. A message from my property management team. 3 more tenants had signed with us, fleeing Davidson and Mitchell's sinking ship. You have 24 hours to decide, I continued. Join us, under new leadership and new principles, or find new offices outside the city center. I hear there's space available in Tacoma. Jeffrey stood slowly, his shoulders slumped. You planned this all along, didn't you? Every detail. No, Mr. Davidson, you planned it. Every time you called me just a secretary. Every time you took credit for my work. Every time you reminded me to know my place. You taught me exactly what kind of leader not to be. After they left, Elizabeth stayed behind. That was impressive, she said. But why give them any chance at all? Why not just let them fail? I sat back down, touching my grandmother's pearls. Because success isn't about destruction. It's about transformation. They'll either learn to adapt or they'll disappear. Either way, the landscape of power in this city has already changed. The next day, news broke of the acquisition. Barrett Strategic Holdings acquires Davidson and Mitchell in historic deal, read the headlines. The business world buzzed with speculation about the mysterious woman who'd built an empire right under everyone's noses. Reporters called, wanting to know how a simple secretary had orchestrated such a takeover. I declined all interviews, letting the results speak for themselves. 1 week later, I called a company-wide meeting. The old Davidson and Mitchell staff, now Barrett Strategic employees, filled the auditorium. Jeffrey and the former partners sat in the back row, their new positions still uncertain. Some of you knew me as a secretary, I began. Others as your landlord. Now you know me as your CEO. But titles aren't what matter here. What matters is vision, dedication, and the courage to be more than what others expect of you. I gestured to Andrea, now my chief of operations, and Elizabeth, my general counsel. Look around. The people you once overlooked are now your leaders. not because of their names or their connections, but because of their talent and their integrity. In the following months, Barrett's strategic holdings transformed Seattle's business landscape. We acquired 3 more firms, renovated 5 buildings, and launched a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs. Jeffrey Davidson eventually retired, unable to adapt to his new role. Bradley Thompson II left for a smaller firm in Tacoma. But others, those who learned to see beyond their prejudices, found new success under our leadership. 1 year after my resignation, I sat in my office reviewing applications for our new mentorship program. A knock at the door revealed Paul, my old security guard from Davidson and Mitchell, now head of building security for all Barrett properties. "Ms. Barrett," he said with a smile, "your next appointment is here." Another former secretary looking to invest in real estate. I smiled back, remembering my own journey. "Send her in, Paul, and remember what I always say." He finished the sentence with me. "There's no such thing as just a secretary." The woman who entered looked nervous but determined, clutching a folder of property analysis. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself, once upon a time. "Welcome," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Tell me, what's your vision?" Because that's what Barrett Strategic had become, not just a company, but a movement. A reminder that power doesn't always look like you expect it to, and that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else ignores. As I listened to her pitch, I touched my grandmother's pearls and smiled. The view from the top was spectacular, but the real satisfaction wasn't in the height of my success. It was in changing the way people reached for it. The morning everything changed, I was wearing my grandmother's pearls and a dark blue dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Not that anyone in Davidson and Mitchell Law noticed. To them, I was just Sophia Barrett, the efficient but unremarkable executive secretary who'd been managing their office for the past 8 years. If they'd bothered to look closer, they might have wondered why someone with an MBA from Wharton and a real estate empire worth 9 figures was just anything. But people see what they expect to see, and Jeffrey Davidson had always expected to see nothing more than a secretary.
My relationship with my mother-in-law, Christine, has always been strained. Despite her mistreatment over the years, she's now asking for a significant favor from me. However, I'm seriously considering using the money for myself instead of fulfilling her request. Let me share my story. My mother-in-law has never treated me well, and the recent request she made comes after a history of disrespect. Even though she urged me to talk about my concerns before bidding me goodnight yesterday, she had called me a murderer among other hurtful things just a few days ago. She even told my daughter that she was good for nothing. I'm a 33-year-old woman who lost my husband in an accident 2 months ago, which was a profound shock for me and my children. Despite the challenges, I focused on supporting my kids. This led me to the decision to let Christine live with us after Ian's death, even though our relationship had never been positive. Christine and I never got along, and my late husband would attribute it to common behavior among mothers. I kept many of our conflicts hidden from him to avoid upsetting him. However, Christine's animosity towards me was apparent. She attempted to kick me out of the house multiple times and threatened to take my children away, claiming I wasn't fit to be a mother. Despite my efforts to be a perfect daughter-in-law, Christine continued to dislike me for irrational reasons. I eventually accepted that nothing would change her opinion, and I chose to ignore her petty and unreasonable behavior. Unfortunately, Christine's health deteriorated, and my biggest fear shifted from preserving my marriage to losing it. She had moved in 8 months before Ian's death, and during that time, she would complain to him and plant unfounded thoughts in his mind. Although those arguments are in the past, the memories linger, especially the ones involving my son Adam. My eldest, Adam, easily saw through Christine's manipulations and grew to dislike her. I discovered him arguing with her on multiple occasions, and he expressed his desire for her not to live with us anymore. I didn't intervene, as I was relieved that Adam saw the truth and was wise enough to shield his younger sisters from Christine's influence. After Ian's death and the funeral, the tensions persist, and now, faced with a hefty request from Christine, I'm contemplating redirecting the funds for my own well-being. Initially, I made the decision to ask Christine to move out, overwhelmed by the financial strain and the added responsibility of supporting another person. However, practicalities forced me to reconsider. Paying for a nurse to be with her in her own apartment was costly, and Ian had been opposed to the idea of placing her in an elderly home. Despite the challenges posed by Christine's presence, she did contribute by helping with cleaning and cooking, the latter being a point of contention as she claimed I was lacking in the kitchen. While it was irksome at first, I eventually let her take charge of the cooking, making my life more predictable. My routine involved enduring insults about my cooking and cleaning skills, consoling my children after Christine's outbursts, attempting to calm down my son Adam, and ending the day with a stress-induced headache. However, things took an unexpected turn when a lawyer visited me 6 days ago in response to our previous phone conversations. Desperate for cash, I had hoped for assets to sell or leverage. My financial worries seemed to dissipate when I inherited a significant amount from Ian. This windfall offered a lifeline, enabling me to support my family, avoid transferring my girls to another school, and even pursue my dream of starting a catering business. Excitedly, I shared the news with Adam, who, despite his joy, insisted on taking a gap year. Although I refrained from pressing the issue, I cautioned him not to disclose the newfound wealth. However, Christine eventually learned about the money and, surprisingly, showed a more humane side, asking how much I had received. This abrupt change in her behavior raised suspicions, especially considering she had never asked me for money before Ian's passing. Adam, perceptive as ever, believed Christine was putting on an act. Now faced with uncertainty, I grapple with whether to ignore his hunch or address the apparent shift in Christine's demeanor. The idea of confronting her about the sudden interest in the money crossed my mind, but instead, I considered the option of moving her back to her house and resuming the expense of hiring a nurse. It begged the question, was this a prudent use of money? This decision came shortly after my recent windfall. Adam's insight about his grandmother proved accurate. It became evident that her primary concern was the money Ian had left in his will. Consequently, I made the difficult decision to cut her off from the family, knowing well that dealing with Christine was never an easy task. When I broached the subject of her moving out, explaining that it was better for both me and the children, and that she could receive the care she apparently needed from a nurse, Christine initially resisted. She expressed her contentment living with me. Despite a brief argument during the second discussion, I decided to drop the matter, considering her recent tolerable behavior. However, my trust in her was shattered when I went out 4 days ago. Engaging in the initial steps of establishing my catering business, I received a request to prepare homemade snacks for an acquaintance. Upon returning home with supplies, I discovered my bedroom in disarray. After some reflection and confrontation, it became clear that Christine had rummaged through my belongings in my absence. The audacity of her actions shocked me. When I confronted her, she refused to disclose her motives and denied taking anything specific. Although nothing seemed missing, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been searching for something among the papers in my room. For the time being, my immediate concern was the violation of privacy rather than any tangible loss. I needed to focus on building my business, having successfully delivered the snacks and secured another gig. The mystery of Christine's actions would have to wait. Contemplating ways to promote my cooking venture, I decided to create business cards to distribute among neighbors and even my children. However, my focus shifted back to the challenge of persuading Christine to move out. I approached her once again yesterday, expressing my need for personal space to concentrate on turning my cooking into a profitable venture. Unexpectedly, Christine resisted, offering to assist with my cooking. Despite declining her help, she became agitated. She presented me with 2 options, either letting her stay and help or allowing her to remain and be a constant annoyance. It became evident that removing my mother-in-law from the house would be no easy task. My determination to evict her intensified after a conversation with my youngest daughter, Susie. Adam, who usually picked her up from school, had something to attend to that day. Susie questioned why I wanted Christine out, revealing that Christine had been feeding her lies, claiming I hated her and wanted nothing to do with her. Susie expressed disappointment, insisting that her grandmother needed care and family time. Despite assuring Susie that Christine was merely joking, inwardly, I was seething. The realization that Christine was manipulating my children and turning them against me left me fuming. That night, Adam and Cecilia sensed my mood upon their return. Despite my attempts to hide it, I excused myself to my bedroom, asking Adam to handle everything. I questioned why Christine would resort to such actions, especially since my suggestion for her to move out was rooted in minimizing problems and ensuring better care for her. It seemed Christine was crossing boundaries and playing games with my children. Determined to address the situation, I decided that this should no longer remain a private family matter. The following morning, after the kids left, I had a one-on-one confrontation with Christine. I informed Christine firmly that she would be moving out of the house, and I made arrangements for her to return to her former apartment, which fortunately was vacant. Despite her resistance, I reminded her that she was in my house now, as everything had been left to me and the children. I suggested she leave voluntarily, avoiding the need for me to force her out, which would result in a reduction of the financial support I was providing. Christine responded by hurling various insults my way, but I chose to ignore them. My focus was on her departure, and I was prepared to show my true colors and be perceived as heartless if it meant relieving myself of the burden she had become. She left before the children returned, and I concocted a story for them, explaining that Christine had chosen to live on her own for a while but would visit soon. Although I disliked lying to my children, I believed it was necessary. With Christine out of the picture, I felt a tremendous weight lifted off my shoulders. My plan was to dedicate all my attention to my children and my work moving forward. Update number 2 brought an unexpected twist. Just over a month after leaving the house, Christine returned, causing a scene and threatening trouble if I didn't allow her to stay in what she referred to as her son's house. To avoid further disturbance, I let her inside with the intention of understanding her motives. Christine asserted that she was here to stay and that no threats would force her out. Then she dropped a bombshell. She accused me of coercing Ian into leaving everything to me and the children, neglecting her entirely. She vowed to prove it, even if it meant going to court, and threatened to take away everything Ian had left. Her accusations left me bewildered. While I had considered the absence of Christine in the will, I chose not to question the lawyer at the time. Ian must have had his reasons for excluding his mother. Perhaps he didn't anticipate her outliving him, especially given her health condition. Nevertheless, I recognized that nothing could be altered in the will, and my empathy was proving challenging for my own well-being. I reluctantly allowed Christine to stay the night, assuring myself that her departure would be ensured the next day. My son, though unhappy with my decision, eased up when I explained that Christine's stay was only temporary. In contrast, Cecilia and Susie were delighted to see their grandmother. However, my reservations persisted, recognizing that Christine, despite her familial connection, lacked the qualities of a positive role model or a genuinely good person. The following morning, I was confronted with a heated argument between Christine and Adam. My daughters looked frightened, prompting me to intervene. Upon inquiry, I discovered that Christine was questioning Cecilia about Ian's will. Adam, who overheard them, intervened and told Christine to cease her line of questioning. In response, Christine raised her voice and threatened to evict both me and my son once she proved that I tampered with the will. Enraged by Christine's audacity and hurtful comments toward my children, I had reached my limit. I quickly ushered my children out of the house, driving all 4 of us to the courthouse to file for a restraining order against Christine. After dropping my children off at a cafe, I returned home to confront Christine, informing her of the legal action I had taken. I made it clear that her continued stay in the house would not matter once the restraining order was in place, and with that, I left her in the bedroom. About half an hour later, I heard her leave, relieved that she had at least the sense to comply. Christine proved to be all talk and no substance when faced with a firm stance. I finally enjoyed a week of peace of mind until Christine started excessively calling. Choosing to ignore most of her calls and even blocking her, I found some reprieve. However, she resorted to calling on the landline, and when I answered, it turned out to be the nurse taking care of Christine, informing me of her deteriorating health. Advised to take her to the hospital due to rising blood pressure, I faced yet another unexpected turn of events. I suspected that Christine's health crisis might be another ploy to manipulate me into taking her back, but I decided to verify. After accompanying her to the hospital, it became clear that her condition was genuine. For the first time since meeting Christine, I felt genuine pity for her. The doctor explained that she needed an extended hospital stay and 24/7 attention, and she lacked health insurance. However, the estimated cost of her treatment presented a dilemma. I had already allocated a significant amount of money I had left behind for my children's education and to build my business. If I used it for Christine's treatment, I have little left for my family. The only alternative was dipping into funds I had set aside, a decision I wasn't sure about. Balancing my responsibilities to my family and recognizing Christine as Ian's mother and the children's grandmother complicated matters. Feeling confused, I sought advice from others and provided an update. While Christine had caused trouble in my life, I couldn't easily abandon her. Update number 3 expressed gratitude for the advice received. Still perplexed, I discussed the situation with Adam, seeking his perspective. Surprisingly, he expressed hesitance to cover Christine's bills, considering the turmoil she had caused and might cause in the future. Shocked by Adam's response, I acknowledged my desire for Christine to recover, but questioned whether it was my sole responsibility to address her predicament. Despite this conversation, I remained conflicted about how to proceed. I pondered Christine's dependence on Ian and the passing of that responsibility to me. Eventually, I had a discussion with the doctor the next day. Reluctantly, I agreed to contribute to Christine's hospital fees. When I approached her, she looked worn and weary, but I remained steadfast in my decision. I made it clear that while I didn't want to cover her entire hospital expenses, I was willing to pay a substantial portion. The catch? She had to agree to leave me and my children alone. During a catering delivery, I overheard a client discussing a nearby state's senior care facility. Intrigued, I researched it and decided that once Christine recovered, that would be her new residence. Providing her with all the necessary details, I hoped she would consider the idea. However, Christine's initial silence gave way to lamenting Ian's death and resuming insults. Even on what could have been her deathbed, she showed no regard for me. Christine then demanded that I settle all the bills, justifying it by Anne being the one who earned the money. Asserting that the money was now mine, I criticized her stubbornness. The insults continued, but I remained unfazed, accustomed to her hurtful words. She attempted emotional blackmail, referencing my children and Ian, but I stood my ground. Considering leaving her fate to chance, Christine called me back, reluctantly agreeing to my conditions. Due to the restraining order, she couldn't approach me or my children anyway. Though Christine was discharged after 9 days, the doctor advised constant vigilance. For a week, she stayed with me and the children, and when the arrangements for her departure were finalized, she left without incident. I experienced a twinge of guilt, noticing a hint of sadness in Christine's eyes as she departed. Yet, I remained resolute in my decision. It was too late to turn back now. Nearly 2 decades into my marriage, Christine chose to treat us as a family only now. For once, her emotions were no longer my concern. Ensuring Christine received the remaining deposit intended for her landlord, initially allocated for a month's stay, I encouraged her to keep the money for emergencies. I also took on the responsibility of managing her finances, severing any further ties. When I inquired about the possibility of visits, Christine responded with a malicious laugh and a curt refusal. I found her answer satisfactory, needing only to concoct a suitable excuse when my children inevitably asked about their grandmother. Surprisingly, they didn't, and the weeks without Christine's presence were peaceful. I recently checked in on her, a gesture out to Ian, and learned she was not unwell. Adam, seeking guidance on his college plans, had indicated that he needed to figure things out. As someone who didn't follow the traditional college path, I found myself uncertain about advising him. On a positive note, my mini catering business thrived, bringing happiness to me and my children. With the hope of avoiding serious obstacles in the future, we continued our journey. The comments received from the previous story indicated a lack of satisfaction with how I handled the situation. Many expressed the wish that I had cut off all contact without extending assistance, even though I had established ground rules before agreeing to cover part of Christine's hospital expenses. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this matter. If you're new to the channel, I'm Mr. Reddito, and I narrate various dramatic stories every day, including mother-in-law dramas, inheritance disputes, cheating stories, Karen encounters, wedding fiascos, and more. I look forward to your thoughts, and remember, it's cool to be kind. Have a great day. I've been hesitant to involve myself with my brother Kevin for the past 5 years. Our relationship took a significant hit when I discovered, at the age of 22, that my girlfriend of 3 years was having an affair with him. This betrayal led to the end of my relationship, and I moved back in with my parents, sharing proof of the affair with them. Despite Kevin's attempts to reconcile and apologize, I maintained my distance, prompting my parents to organize an intervention involving my ex, Kevin, and extended family. However, instead of fostering forgiveness, this intervention deepened my hurt and resentment. Unable to bear the pain, I eventually decided to cut ties with Kevin and my parents, except for occasional contact with a cousin due to my grandmother's health issues. Recently, during a visit to the hospital, I unexpectedly encountered Kevin. Though he expressed a desire to talk and reconcile, I feigned ignorance, leaving him emotional and distraught. Learning about Kevin's deteriorating mental health since our estrangement, my parents pleaded with me to reconnect with him, insisting that my support could alleviate his suffering. Despite their pleas, I adamantly refused, expressing my belief that Kevin's mental well-being shouldn't rest on my shoulders. My refusal led to Kevin attempting self-harm, which my parents attributed to my rejection. Faced with this distressing situation, I grappled with conflicting emotions, torn between the desire to protect my own well-being and the pain inflicted on my brother. In reflecting on my experiences, I struggled to reconcile the profound sense of betrayal with the familial bond we once shared. Despite external pressure and the genuine concern for Kevin's mental health, I find myself unable to forgive and rebuild a relationship that was shattered by his actions. In grappling with the aftermath, I question whether my decision to keep my distance makes me the wrongdoer in this familial saga. I have been in a relationship with my girlfriend, Janine, for 8 years. While our connection has been strong in many aspects, our intimate life has dwindled significantly over the past 2 years, reaching a point where we haven't been intimate for 4 months. Despite my efforts to address and resolve this issue, Janine has shown reluctance to seek medical help or engage in couples therapy. As we plan to move in together and buy a house, I expressed my concern about our intimate life, stating that I wasn't comfortable taking the next step without improvement in that aspect. This discussion stemmed from a prior agreement where Janine had acknowledged the need to work on our intimate life before moving forward. However, she hadn't made any efforts or taken any actions during that year. When I shared my hesitation to pursue the next stage of our relationship due to the unresolved issue, Janine became furious, accusing me of holding our future hostage for more intimacy. She left, and since then, I've received a text message informing me that she won't be attending a planned dinner date until I decide not to be in a hole anymore. While I believe my concerns are valid, I'm now questioning if I am the one at fault for halting our plans and potentially jeopardizing our future together. Am I the a-hole for prioritizing our sexual compatibility before committing to buying a house and taking our relationship further?
The leather chair squeaked as James Harrison leaned back, examining me like I was an inconvenient typo in his morning reports. His new nameplate gleamed on the desk. Director of Global Operations, Maxwell Industries, the position I'd been unofficially doing for the past 3 years. Look, Olivia, he said, dragging out my name like it was something distasteful. The fact is, your role here has become redundant. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, face neutral. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what used to be my office, London's financial district sparkled in the morning sun. The same view I'd looked at every day while building Maxwell's international client portfolio from 2 accounts to 27. Redundant? I repeated softly. He smiled, the kind of smile that never touches the eyes. Let's be honest. You were David's secretary who got lucky. He let you handle some client interactions, make some decisions. Very progressive of him. But now that he's retired, I'm the senior account manager for our top 5 clients, I corrected, including Rothschild Global. Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Titles are just titles. The reality is, we need someone with real executive experience. Someone who understands global operations at a fundamental level. Someone like you. I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. Exactly? He didn't even catch the sarcasm. I've spent 15 years in operations, MBA from Harvard. Summer home in the Hamptons. I know how to talk to these people. These people, like the CFO of Rothschild Global, wasn't the daughter of Nigerian immigrants. Like the CEO of Zhang Technologies, didn't prefer meeting in hole-in-the-wall dumpling shops instead of fancy restaurants. Our clients have specific expectations. I tried one last time. Relationships built over years. Oh, don't worry about that, Harrison cut in. I've already scheduled meetings with all the major accounts. Once they see the new direction we're taking, they'll understand. Business is business, after all. I thought about the weekly calls I had with Sarah Adenuga at Rothschild. About our shared love of true crime podcasts and the recipes we exchanged. About how I'd attended her daughter's graduation last month. When? I asked simply. Effective immediately. He slid a folder across the desk. HR has prepared a generous severance package. 2 months' salary, standard NDA, letter of recommendation. Though between us, he winked. With your limited qualifications, you might want to look at smaller firms. Or maybe go back to being a regular secretary. The words hit like physical blows, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I thought about the email I'd received last night from Michael Zhang, confirming our private dinner next week to discuss expanding their contract to $50 million annually. The dinner Harrison didn't know about. I'll need to inform the clients, I said. No need. We'll handle all communications. Clean break, you understand. In fact, he glanced at his watch. Security is waiting to escort you out. Standard procedure. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. Of course. Though you might want to review the client communication protocols. He frowned. The what? The individual communication preferences each client has specified in their contract. They're quite particular about how they receive updates and who they'll speak with. Harrison's frown deepened. That's hardly necessary. I'll just have my assistant. Your choice, I shrugged, picking up my bag. Though you might want to check Section 7.3 of the Rothschild Agreement, the part about designated points of contact. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. I'm sure it's all standard boilerplate. I smiled, remembering the clause I personally negotiated with Rothschild's legal team last year. The one that specified all strategic communications had to go through their designated account manager. Me. Good luck, Mr. Harrison. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Security was waiting outside, 2 guards looking distinctly uncomfortable. They'd worked with me for years, see me stay late, arrive early, build something from nothing. Sorry about this, Ms. Walker, Jim, the senior guard, muttered. It's fine, I assured him. Just doing your job. As we walked to my desk, people peeked over cubicle walls and around corners. The news had spread fast. I kept my head high as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. The family photo. The small jade plant I kept alive for 3 years. The handwritten thank you note from Michael Zhang after I'd helped his company navigate a crucial merger. What Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment since the day his appointment was announced. I'd seen it in his eyes during our first meeting, the way he'd looked past me while I briefed him on our major accounts. The way he'd interrupted me to ask if his coffee could be reheated. My phone buzzed as I waited for the elevator. A message from Sarah at Rothschild. Weekly strategy call tomorrow at 9 a.m. London time, as usual. Don't be late. I smiled, thinking about Harrison trying to handle that call. Sarah, who refused to speak to anyone she hadn't personally vetted. Sarah, who had made it clear when signing their $30 million contract that I was the reason Rothschild chose Maxwell Industries. Another buzz. Michael Jean. Dinner still on for next week, flying in from Hong Kong specially. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I let security escort me through the lobby, past the marble columns and sprawling reception desk where I'd started as a temp secretary 7 years ago. Outside, London's morning rush was in full swing. I took a deep breath of city air, car exhaust, coffee shops, possibility. Need a cab, Ms. Walker? Jim asked. No thanks, I said, hefting my box. I think I'll walk. As I turned toward Bank Station, my phone buzzed again. An email from Maxwell's legal team reminding me about the NDA's confidentiality provisions. I almost laughed. They thought the NDA would protect them, that it would keep me quiet, make me disappear. What they didn't understand was that I didn't need to say anything. The clients would do all the talking for me. At home, in my small but immaculate flat in Greenwich, I set my box of belongings on the kitchen counter and opened my personal laptop. Not the company machine. I'd left that behind, wiped clean of everything except work files. This computer contained something far more valuable, my private database of client interactions, preferences, and relationships. Not confidential company information. I was too careful for that. But the personal details that made business relationships work, the kind of details Harrison would never think to ask about. Like how Sarah from Rothschild was deathly allergic to shellfish, making Harrison's planned dinner at that new seafood restaurant a potential disaster. Or how Michael Jean always scheduled important meetings for Tuesday because it was his late mother's favorite day. Or how the CEO of their third largest client, Frederick Larson, refused to do video calls before 11 a.m. his time because he had a standing breakfast date with his teenage daughter. These weren't trade secrets. They were human connections, the kind that couldn't be documented in any CRM system or passed along in any handover notes. My phone buzzed again. A message from Diana Chen, my former mentor who'd left Maxwell 2 years ago to start her own consulting firm. Heard what happened. Let me know when you're ready to talk about Plan B. Plan B. We discussed it months ago, when Harrison's appointment was first announced. I dismissed it then, still believing that competence and results would matter more than politics and prejudice. I should have known better. Opening my email, I began drafting a careful message to Sarah at Rothschild. Nothing about being fired. Harrison could handle that announcement himself. Just a brief note about my personal email address and phone number, in case you need to reach me. I did the same for Michael Jean, Frederick Larson, and the other key clients I cultivated over the years. No complaints, no accusations, just information they might find useful. Then I settled in to wait. The next morning would bring Harrison's first real test. The weekly strategy call with Rothschild Global. The one where Sarah Adenuga expected detailed updates on 6 different initiatives. The one that required intimate knowledge of their operations, their goals, their concerns. The one that Harrison didn't even know existed. As I made dinner, pasta with the pesto Sarah had taught me to make, I thought about Harrison sitting in my old office, probably already planning how to restructure the client relationships I built, how to make them fit his idea of how business should work. My phone buzzed one last time. A calendar invite from Diana. Breakfast tomorrow, after the fireworks. I accepted with a smile, then set my phone aside and enjoyed my dinner in peace. Tomorrow would be interesting enough without worrying about it tonight. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's simply stepping aside and letting reality do the work for you. And reality was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. I was already settled at Diana's favorite cafe in Covent Garden when my phone lit up at exactly 9:01 a.m. Right on schedule. Good morning, Ms. Walker. Sarah Adenuga's crisp Nigerian-British accent was unmistakable. I've just had the most fascinating interaction with your replacement. I stirred my coffee slowly. Oh? Indeed, he seemed quite surprised when I asked about the Thomson merger implications. Even more surprised when I mentioned the regulatory compliance updates we discussed last week. But do you know what truly shocked him? What's that? When I informed him that our contract explicitly requires all strategic communications to be handled by our designated account manager, the one listed by name in Section 7.3, I could picture Harrison's face, the slow realization dawning as he frantically flipped through contract pages. He's currently scrambling to find the document, Sarah continued, amusement clear in her voice. I've put the call on hold. Been waiting for 6 minutes now. Deanna arrived at our table, raising an eyebrow at my phone conversation. That sounds challenging, I said neutrally. Olivia, Sarah's voice turned serious. What happened? I believe Mr. Harrison is implementing his vision for the company's future, one that doesn't include certain redundant elements. A sharp intake of breath. He didn't. He did. Yesterday afternoon. That absolute fool. Sarah's tone could have frozen the Thames. Well, he's about to have a very educational morning. I've already emailed their board. My phone buzzed with another incoming call. Michael Jean. Sarah, I should go. Other calls coming in. Of course. Dinner next week. My treat. We have much to discuss. I switched calls just as Diana's coffee arrived. Olivia. Michael's voice was animated. I just tried to reach you at the office. They said you're no longer with the company. Some new director tried to tell me he'd be handling our account personally. He didn't even know about our expansion plans. Yes, Mr. Harrison has taken over global operations. Harrison? Michael snorted. The one who spent our only meeting talking about his Hamptons house and Harvard MBA. Please, I'm canceling next week's dinner and the contract discussion. That's your prerogative, I said carefully, mindful of my NDA. It's more than that. I've got calls into 3 other firms. Ones that understand the value of relationships over resumes. A pause. Any of them you'd recommend? Before I could answer, another call beeped through. Frederick Larson. The next 2 hours were a blur of calls and messages. Every major client I'd cultivated. Every relationship I'd built, reaching out one after another. Not just checking on me, but actively pulling away from Maxwell Industries. Diana sat quietly, occasionally sliding pastries toward me as she watched the drama unfold. At 11:23 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Jim in security. Board members arriving. Emergency meeting called. Harrison looks like he's seen a ghost. I could imagine the scene unfolding in the Maxwell offices. The mounting crisis as client after client either refused to speak with Harrison or explicitly threatened to take their business elsewhere. The dawning realization that I hadn't just managed accounts. I'd built relationships that went far deeper than quarterly reports and profit margins. Time for Plan B. Diana asked as I finally set down my phone. I nodded. Tell me more about your consulting firm. She smiled, pulling out a sleek folder. We've been waiting for you. Corner office, full autonomy, and a chance to build something new. Something better. Won't Maxwell's NDA be a problem? Actually, she slid a document across the table. I had our lawyers review it. The NDA prevents you from sharing confidential company information. It doesn't prevent you from accepting clients who choose to follow you, especially if they make that choice without any solicitation on your part. My phone buzzed again. An email from Maxwell's board secretary. Emergency meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. Your presence is requested. Call details attached. Deanna raised an eyebrow. Going to accept. I thought about Harrison probably pacing in my old office, watching his grand plans crumble. About the board members, finally realizing what they'd allowed to happen. Of course, I said, opening my laptop. It would be rude to refuse. At 2:55 p.m., I logged into the video call from Diana's office. One by one, faces appeared on screen. Board members I'd briefed countless times. Harrison, his tie slightly askew, eyes darting nervously. And in the center square, Charles Maxwell himself, the company's founder, pulled back from semi-retirement for this crisis. Ms. Walker, Charles began without preamble. We find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. I waited silently. This morning we received formal notifications from 6 major clients, representing over $120 million in annual contracts. They've all indicated their intent to terminate their relationships with Maxwell Industries, citing concerns about account management changes. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Additionally, Charles continued, we've received a rather pointed letter from Rothschild Global's legal team regarding breach of contract. Specifically, Section 7.3 of their service agreement. The designated account manager clause, I said helpfully. Indeed, Charles's eyes narrowed. A clause that, upon review, appears in various forms in all our major client contracts. Clauses that specifically name you as the required point of contact. Harrison's face had gone from red to pale. Sir, if I had known. Yes, Mr. Harrison. If you had known. If you had bothered to review the contracts. If you had taken 5 minutes to understand the relationships Ms. Walker built instead of assuming her role was, what was the word? Redundant? The silence was deafening. Ms. Walker, Charles turned back to me. We would like to offer you your position back, with a significant increase in both compensation and authority. Full directorship, board seat, whatever you require. I smiled gently. That's very generous, Charles. But I've actually just accepted another position. Name your price, Harrison burst out. Whatever they're offering, we'll double it. It's not about the money, Mr. Harrison. It never was. It was about respect. About understanding that business isn't just titles and MBAs. It's relationships. Trust. The kind of things you can't buy with a summer home in the Hamptons. Charles nodded slowly. Diana Chen's firm? Yes. She's been trying to poach you for 2 years. And now she has. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. I should mention, I've received several calls from clients today. I haven't responded to any of their business inquiries, of course. That would violate my NDA. Harrison made a choking sound. Of course, Charles said dryly, and I suppose once your garden leave ends, I'll be free to respond to any inquiries that may come my way, purely coincidentally. The board members exchanged glances. They knew, just as I did, what would happen next. The clients wouldn't just leave Maxwell. They would follow me to Diana's firm. Not because I asked them to, but because they wanted to. Is there nothing we can do to change your mind? Charles asked quietly. I thought about Harrison's smirk as he dismissed me, about all the times I've been underestimated, overlooked, assumed to be just a secretary. I'm afraid not. But I wish you all the best, especially you, Mr. Harrison. I'm sure you'll do fine once you learn how to reheat your own coffee. I ended the call before anyone could respond. Diana was waiting outside her office. Well, I believe I'm officially unemployed. For about 30 more seconds. She grinned, holding up a contract, ready to become a partner at Cheng Global Consulting. I took the contract, thinking about all the possibilities ahead, about building something new, something that valued substance over status, relationships over resumes. Partner and head of global strategy, I read from the title page. Well, Diana smirked. We couldn't very well call you a secretary, could we? My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Sarah at Rothschild. Just terminated our contract with Maxwell. Such a shame. I don't suppose you'll be taking on new clients soon. I looked at Diana, who nodded encouragingly. Give me 2 weeks, I typed back. I'm about to start something new. Something much better than revenge. Something that would show everyone exactly who they'd underestimated. And Harrison? He was about to learn the hardest lesson in business. Sometimes the person you dismiss as just a secretary is actually the one running the whole show. He just hadn't figured it out in time. 6 months after walking out of Maxwell Industries, I stood in front of Cheng Global Consulting's newly expanded London office, watching our logo being installed on the building's facade. In the reflection of the glass doors, I could see Maxwell's building several blocks away. They'd recently laid off 30% of their staff. Admiring the view, Diana appeared beside me, 2 coffee cups in hand. Or just enjoying the irony? I accepted the coffee with a smile. Both, maybe. Did you see the news this morning? About Harrison's resignation. Hard to miss. Though resignation seems generous when you're asked to leave by unanimous board vote. The headline had been diplomatic. Maxwell Industries announces leadership changes amid continued client exodus. The reality was far more brutal. After losing over $200 million in contracts in 6 months, the board had finally had enough. Sarah sent me the internal numbers, I said, sipping my coffee. They're down 68% in global operations revenue. Diana whistled. Turns out relationships matter more than Harvard MBAs. Who knew? We walked into the building together, passing through the bustling reception area. In half a year, Cheng Global had grown from a boutique consulting firm to a major player in international business strategy. Our client list read like a who's who of global commerce, with Rothschild Global and Zhang Technologies leading the pack. My new office, earned, not taken, occupied the corner of the 18th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer views of the city I'd helped reshape, one client relationship at a time. But unlike Harrison's sterile domain, my space reflected actual work. Whiteboards covered in strategy notes, a conference table perpetually surrounded by chairs, and most importantly, an open-door policy that made every employee feel welcome. Morning, Olivia. Jessica, my new assistant, appeared with the day's schedule. I'd insisted on hiring her away from Maxwell's reception desk, recognizing the same hunger for growth I'd once had. Thanks, Jess. Still on for your strategy training this afternoon? She beamed. Unlike Maxwell, Chen Global had a clear advancement path for everyone, regardless of their starting position. Jessica was already handling junior client interactions, building her own network of relationships. Wouldn't miss it. Oh, and Michael Zhang sent over the final contract revision. He's added 2 more subsidiaries to our portfolio. I nodded, remembering the dinner where Michael had officially moved his business to Chen Global. He'd insisted on hosting at the same dumpling shop where we'd first discussed his company's international expansion 3 years ago. Your success isn't surprising, he'd said over steaming jiao longbao. You understand that business is about people, not just profits. My phone buzzed. A message from Charles Maxwell himself. Got a minute to talk. Deanna, reading over my shoulder, raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Going to take it? Of course. I settled behind my desk, activated the speakerphone. Charles, how are you? Surviving. He sounded tired. Though I suspect you know exactly how we're doing. I hear things occasionally. Things. He chuckled without humor. Like how our entire Asia-Pacific division followed Zhang Technologies out the door. Or how Rothschild just canceled their last remaining contract. I stayed silent, letting him continue. The board asked me to reach out, one last time. We're prepared to offer you full control of global operations. Carte blanche to rebuild however you see fit. That's very generous, I said carefully. But I'm happy where I am. So I gathered. A pause. We should have seen it, you know, what Harrison couldn't understand. What I couldn't understand until it was too late. And what's that? That the strength of a business isn't in its organizational charts or its fancy titles. It's in its relationships, its people. Another pause. The ones we dismissed as just anything, secretaries, assistants, support staff. I thought about Jessica, already showing the same instincts that had helped me build my client portfolio. About Jim from security, who now headed our facilities team, treating every employee and visitor with the respect that built lasting loyalty. It's an expensive lesson, I said finally. Yes, his voice turned thoughtful. I don't suppose Chen Global would be interested in acquiring what's left of Maxwell's Global Operations division. Now it was my turn to pause. I'll bring it up with Diana, though any deal would require significant restructuring. Of course, he sounded relieved just to have the conversation. We could discuss it over dinner perhaps. That Italian place you always recommended, but I was too busy to try. I'll have Jessica set something up. After we hung up, Diana burst out laughing. Are we really going to buy out Maxwell's division? Maybe, I smiled. At the right price, with the right changes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of client calls, strategy sessions, and mentoring meetings. I made a point of knowing every employee's name, their aspirations, their potential. No one was just anything at Chen Global. At 6 p.m., as I was reviewing the next day's presentations, Sarah from Rothschild stopped by. She'd flown in specially for tomorrow's board meeting, my first as Chen Global's newest managing partner. Quite a view, she said, looking out over London. Better than your old office. Different perspective, I agreed, though I learned a lot from that view too. She turned, studying me thoughtfully. You know, when Harrison first told me you were gone, he said you were just a secretary who'd gotten lucky. That real leadership required a certain pedigree. And now? Now he's updating his LinkedIn profile while you're building an empire, she smiled. Karma has a peculiar sense of humor. Later that evening, after most of the office had cleared out, I found Jessica still at her desk, studying client reports. Learning the patterns? I asked. She looked up, slightly embarrassed. Just trying to understand how you do it. Build these relationships that last. I sat down beside her desk, remembering all the late nights I'd spent doing exactly the same thing. Want to know the secret? I pointed to the client file she was reading. It's not about their business metrics or their market position. It's about remembering that their daughter just started university, that they're training for a marathon, that they prefer Earl Grey to English breakfast tea. Human details, she said thoughtfully. Exactly, because at the end of the day, business isn't about companies. It's about people. And people remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you actually did. My phone buzzed one final time, a news alert. Maxwell Industries stock had dropped another 15% on Harrison's departure announcement. Jessica saw the headline and smiled sympathetically. Do you ever feel bad about what happened to them? I thought about Harrison's dismissive smirk, about all the times I've been overlooked and underestimated, about the lesson that needed to be learned. No, I said honestly. Sometimes people need to lose everything to understand what really matters. Besides, I gestured around at our thriving office. We built something better. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare for the board meeting. The agenda included our expansion plans, including the possible Maxwell acquisition. But more importantly, it included our new employee development program, ensuring that no one would ever be dismissed as just anything again. As I set up my presentation, I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. It showed my first day as a temp secretary at Maxwell Industries, young and uncertain but determined. I kept it as a reminder not of where I'd started, but of how far I'd come. My phone lit up with a message from Diana, ready to show them what just a secretary can really do. I smiled, straightening my jacket and gathering my materials. The boardroom would be full of industry leaders, major clients, and institutional investors. All of them there to hear my vision for the future. A future where titles didn't define potential, where relationships mattered more than resumes, where success was measured not by who you could dismiss, but by who you could lift up. More than ready, I tagged back. Because the best revenge isn't just proving them wrong. It's building something so right that their mistakes become irrelevant. And that's exactly what we did.
I am Liz, and through a curious twist of fate, I find myself bound to the most remarkable man I've ever encountered. Alex, we're both 28, proud owners of our cozy abode, diligently covering our bills while crafting a life uniquely. A year has passed since we exchanged vows, and truth be told, life has been quite pleasant, except for a singular complication: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong. I never anticipated playing the role of the knight in shining armor as the daughter-in-law. However, I certainly didn't envision becoming the family's unwelcome guest either. The inaugural encounter with my in-laws felt akin to entering a lion's den with a stake strapped to my neck. Jane, my mother-in-law, possessed a knack for scrutinizing me, as though pondering whether I was more of an inconvenience or just plain dull. It was evident that she had formed her opinion about me before I could even utter a greeting. Alex had forewarned me about his mom's assertive personality on our way to their place that first time, advising me not to take it too personally. Despite my efforts at dinner while innocently passing the salt, Jane seized the opportunity to reminisce about Stephanie's culinary prowess, referring to me in the third person. Alex, seemingly uncomfortable, acknowledged her remarks without meeting my gaze. Feeling like an invisible presence at the table, I swallowed my discomfort with a forced smile. When I tentatively acknowledged Stephanie's cooking skills, Jane's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed to be measuring me against a ghost, and I confided in Alex about feeling scrutinized. He reassured me, holding me close and affirming that I was the one he chose. Little did I know that Jane had a more intricate plan in motion, and I was unwittingly cast as the pawn in her familial chess game. Living with a severe allergy is more than just inconvenient. It's akin to having a persistent shadow whispering danger in your ear. Since childhood, peanuts have been my formidable adversaries, leading to an emergency room visit after a mere spoonful of peanut paste. Consequently, my parents received a crystal-clear directive: shield her from peanuts and an array of other foods for her well-being: soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes. It's a list that raises eyebrows among waiters and prompts hesitation from friends inviting me over for dinner. Jane, my mother-in-law, is well aware of this extensive list. Nevertheless, she manages to question the restrictions every time we dine at her place. Her tone, hovering between concern and disbelief, persistently suggests that maybe I can indulge just a bit, oblivious to the potential consequences. Once at a family gathering, Jane insisted on the safety of her casserole, only for Alex to discover a potentially hazardous ingredient. Though we gracefully excused ourselves, leaving the untouched casserole behind, the incident lingered as a small victory in an ongoing battle where Jane held all the cards. I've learned to navigate this allergen-laden world with caution, treating every meal outing as a strategic operation. Alex, with his supportive demeanor, accompanies me through this culinary minefield, constantly reassuring me that my cautiousness is justified. Yet, Jane's subtle jabs persist, extending beyond the dinner table. Her texts carry a warning tone, reminding me that not everyone takes my conditions seriously. It's more than a mere jab. It's a reminder of vulnerability, a realization that my allergy is perceived as a weakness to be exploited. Dinners at Jane's house are orchestrated affairs, resembling a play where everyone knows their lines except for the unwitting lead. I, the daughter-in-law, I was the unpredictable element, the wild card capable of unintentionally stirring up a commotion with a single bite. Alex did his best to ease the situation, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing on someone else's home turf. On a particular evening, the tension hung in the air as heavily as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there with my plate empty, anxiously waiting to discern what I could eat without risking a hospital visit. Alex, in his ever-supportive manner, passed the green beans, urging, "They're just divine." Jane's voice dripped with sweetness that failed to reach her eyes. Eyeing the beans, I sensed something was off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," Jane replied, waving a dismissive hand. Halting Alex's reach, I said, "I can't eat those. Almonds are a no-go for me, Jane." Feigning surprise, a hand to her chest, she responded, "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex stood up, his chair scraping back, his voice firm with frustration. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." Jane's eyes narrowed slightly and she retorted, "I just wanted to make something nice. It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, forks pausing midair, and embarrassed glances exchanged. Mark, Alex's dad, attempted to diffuse the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were jotting down notes for the next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came. Tired of feeling like a problem to be managed." I responded, "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, as if he were seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. On this particular evening, a cloud seemed to settle over him, and I knew it before he even spoke. "My mom thinks we should consider." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled, asserting, "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sign of stress. I know. It's just she has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension palpable. I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said. But as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. It wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy was a happy surprise for Alex and me, but a complicated one for everyone else. When we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions, a pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're gonna have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations. But I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes the night of the dinner arrived, and the house buzzed with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, moving gracefully from guest to guest. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz. This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight I hoped would be different. As the table was a feast, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up." "You're eating for two now?" I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, meeting her gaze. There was a flicker of something there, concern, or perhaps it was a challenge. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, placing the bread down. However, warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It felt like too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, with congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, concealing a trap set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner, meant to celebrate our future baby, was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, creating a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. However, my stomach was tied in knots. Not from hunger. Every dish felt like a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital. As we all took our seats, lively chatter filled the air, comprising the usual family gossip and stories. Jane, at the head of the table, presided over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. "Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family," Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. Applause and cheers followed, and I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just being careful," I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it," she said, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. "Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight," I said, avoiding the salad that could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked, and the room felt hot, the walls closing in. Then came the cake, a beautiful confection with layers of sponge and cream that drew admiration from the room. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. "For the mom-to-be," she said. "I really shouldn't," I said, looking at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. "But it looks delicious." "Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby," Jane pressed, her voice as sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, swiftly knocking the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and stunned silence fell over the room. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex exclaimed, anger and confusion in his voice. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. "I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it." To a room erupted in chaos. Jane's face showed shock, but her eyes betrayed something darker, fear, maybe guilt. Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. "Mom, did you know about this?" Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment, the truth became as clear as the danger on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Mom, is it true? Did you know?" Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw a hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but jeopardized her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur of arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy, family was shattered. The drive home was quiet, filled with a heavy silence, loaded with things left unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, sitting beside me and taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. This is unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from relatives expressing shock, support, and apologies. Through it all, there was deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "My dad's left her. He can't get past what she did," he said, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. He said it's been a long time coming. I wasn't sure how to feel: relief, sadness, pity. "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "She's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. Outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. In that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger, and the scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. As for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together.
My laptop displayed the quarterly revenue charts. As I prepared to address our board of directors, the same numbers I'd been analyzing since 3 that morning. Innovate Tech Solutions had grown from a startup in my garage to a $50 million company, but according to my business partner, Marcus Chen, I was just along for the ride. Quarterly revenue is up 37%. I began, clicking to the next slide. The boardroom was packed with investors, advisors, and department heads, all watching the presentation I'd spent weeks preparing. Our AI-driven predictive analytics platform has secured contracts with 12 Fortune 500 companies this quarter alone. Marcus shifted in his seat at the far end of the mahogany table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his MBA from Stanford prominently displayed behind him in a gold frame. He positioned himself as the face of our company from day one, handling client meetings and investor presentations while relegating me to what he called back-end support. The irony wasn't lost on me.
back-end support, as if developing the revolutionary algorithms that powered our entire platform was some kind of clerical work. The predictive accuracy has improved to 96.4%. I continued, which represents a significant advancement in the field of machine learning applications for business intelligence. Board member Patricia Williams leaned forward. Julia, these numbers are impressive. Can you walk us through the technical improvements you've implemented? Before I could respond, Marcus cleared his throat loudly. Actually, Patricia, I think we should focus on the business metrics rather than getting bogged down in technical details. Not everyone here has a computer science background. I paused mid-click, my finger hovering over the laptop trackpad. This was typical Marcus. Any time the conversation turned to the actual technology that made our company valuable, he redirected to sales figures and market positioning, areas where he could shine while keeping me firmly in shadows. I think the board would benefit from understanding the technical foundation, I said calmly, especially since our upcoming product launch relies heavily on the new algorithms I've developed. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor. The sound cut through the room like a warning shot. Let's be honest here, Julia. You're just the silent money in this partnership. Leave the real decisions to people who understand technology and business strategy. The room fell silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming, could see the uncomfortable glances exchanged between board members. Investment advisor Robert Chen shifted his papers nervously. CFO Patricia Williams stared at her hands. Marcus continued, his voice gaining confidence as he warmed to his theme. Julia's a wonderful person, don't get me wrong. Her initial investment got us started, and we're grateful for that. But running a technology company requires experience, leadership, market understanding. Things that can't be learned from textbooks. My initial investment. As if the $200,000 I'd put in from my previous startup sale was all I'd contributed. As if the countless 18-hour days I'd spent coding, debugging, and perfecting our algorithms were somehow irrelevant. Marcus, I said quietly, perhaps you'd like to explain to the board how our predictive analytics actually work. Since you understand technology so well. His face flushed slightly. That's not necessary. What matters is results, not technical minutiae. I nodded slowly, reaching for my briefcase. The leather was worn from years of carrying it to client meetings, investor presentations, and late-night coding sessions. Marcus had always dismissed it as outdated, preferring his sleek aluminum attaché case that matched his MacBook Pro. You're absolutely right, I said, clicking the briefcase latches open. Results are what matter. I pulled out a thick manila folder, the kind that lawyers use for important documents. The papers inside were yellowed with age, some of them dating back 6 years to when I first started developing the core algorithms that would eventually become Innovate Tech Solutions. Before we discussed results, I said, placing the folder on the conference table, I think the board should understand who actually owns the intellectual property that generates those impressive revenue numbers Marcus mentioned. Marcus's confident expression flickered. Julia, what are you doing? I opened the folder carefully, revealing the top document. United States Patent and Trademark Office. It read in official government typography. Patent number 10,847,392. Inventor, Julia Martinez. Filed, March 15, 2018. This is the original patent for our predictive analytics engine, I explained to the suddenly attentive board. Filed 18 months before Marcus and I officially became business partners. Patricia Williams reached for the document, her eyes scanning the technical specifications and legal language. Julia, this is the core technology that powers your entire platform. That's correct. I pulled out the next document. Patent 10,923,847. The machine learning optimization algorithms, also filed solely under my name. Marcus had gone very still. The color was draining from his face as board members passed the patents around the table, reading my name as the sole inventor on every single document. And here, I continued, producing a third patent is the natural language processing component that allows our system to analyze unstructured data. Filed 14 months before Marcus joined the company. The boardroom was silent except for the rustling of papers as investors and advisors examined the patents. Robert Chen looked up from his copy, his expression grave. Marcus, were you aware that Julia holds sole ownership of these patents? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. His usual smooth confidence had evaporated. We're partners. I assumed. You assumed what? I asked quietly. That because I let you handle sales presentations and investor meetings, you somehow own the technology that makes those meetings possible? I pulled out a laptop from my briefcase. Not the sleek MacBook everyone expected, but a battered ThinkPad covered in coding stickers. The same machine I'd used to write the first lines of code that would eventually become our AI platform. Would you like me to show the board the original source code? I asked, opening the laptop. It's all time-stamped. Every algorithm, every optimization, every breakthrough that Marcus claims to understand so well. The screen displayed a directory full of files, each one dated and documented. Years of work, thousands of hours of development, all bearing my digital signature. Board member David Kim leaned forward. Julia, if you own all the core patents, what exactly is Marcus's role in the company? I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the table like it might offer him escape. That's an excellent question, David. Marcus, would you like to explain to the board what you've contributed beyond sales presentations and taking credit for my work? This is ridiculous, Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. I've built relationships with clients. I've secured funding. I've managed the business side while Julia focused on coding. Interesting, I said, pulling out another document. Because according to our client contracts, they're specifically licensing my patented technology. The relationships you've built are entirely dependent on intellectual property that belongs to me. Patricia Williams was studying the patents intently. Julia, these are remarkably sophisticated. The technical depth here suggests years of specialized development. 12 years, actually, I replied. I started working on predictive analytics during my PhD program at MIT. The core algorithms in these patents represent the culmination of over a decade of research and development. Marcus suddenly stood up. This is clearly some kind of setup. Julia's trying to undermine our partnership because what? I interrupted. Because I'm tired of being called just the silent money at board meetings. Because I'm sick of watching you take credit for work you couldn't begin to understand. I clicked to a new screen on my laptop, displaying lines of complex code. Marcus, since you understand technology so well, perhaps you could explain to the board what this function does. Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The code was dense, mathematical, the kind of algorithmic thinking that required years of training to comprehend. That's not. It's the core prediction engine, I said calmly. The algorithm that processes millions of data points and generates the insights our clients pay $50,000 per month to access. I wrote every line of this code. I optimized every function. I debugged every error. David Kim was taking notes now. Julia, what percentage of the company's core technology did you develop personally? I pulled up a technical documentation file. 97%. Marcus's contributions are limited to user interface suggestions and marketing copy. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus slumped back into his chair, his earlier bravado completely deflated. There's something else the board should know, I continued, opening a new folder. 3 months ago, Tech Global Corporation approached us about acquiring our technology. Marcus negotiated a preliminary offer of $100 million. Several board members straightened up. $100 million was more than double our current valuation. However, I continued, since I own all the core patents, any acquisition would require my explicit consent. Marcus forgot to mention that during his negotiations, Robert Chin's eyes widened. Marcus, is this true? You negotiated a deal without securing the intellectual property rights? Marcus's face had gone completely white. I thought. You thought you could sell technology you don't own, I finished. Just like you thought you could take credit for innovations you didn't create. I pulled out my phone and opened the email app. In fact, I received this message from Tech Global's CEO this morning. I read aloud. Ms. Martinez, after reviewing the patent filings you forwarded, we're prepared to discuss a direct acquisition of your intellectual property. Given your sole ownership of the core technology, we see no need to involve other parties in these negotiations. The board members exchanged glances. The implications were clear. Tech Global was offering to buy me out directly, cutting Marcus and potentially the entire company out of the deal. Julia, Patricia Williams said carefully, what are your intentions regarding this acquisition offer? I closed my laptop and gathered the patents back into their folder. That depends on this board. Are you interested in continuing to work with someone who truly understands the technology? Or would you prefer to stick with a partner who dismisses the inventor as just the silent money? Marcus finally found his voice. Julia, you can't do this. We built this company together. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Together? Marcus, I built the technology that powers every product we sell. I developed the algorithms that generate every dollar of revenue. I created the intellectual property that makes this company valuable. What exactly did we build together? The business relationships are based entirely on my technology, I interrupted. Our clients don't care about your MBA or your sales presentations. They care about predictive analytics that actually work. And those analytics exist because I spent 12 years developing the mathematical models that make them possible. I stood up, closing my briefcase with a decisive snap. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for next week. We'll be voting on a new corporate structure that accurately reflects intellectual property ownership and technical contributions. Board member David Kim raised his hand. Julia, before you go, could you clarify something? If you own all the core patents, what prevents you from simply licensing the technology to a different company? Marcus's eyes went wide with panic. He clearly hadn't considered this possibility. Nothing, I said simply. The patents are in my name. I could license them exclusively to Tech Global tomorrow and leave Marcus with a company that has no technology to sell. You wouldn't, Marcus whispered. I looked at him directly for the first time since placing the patents on the table. 2 hours ago, I wouldn't have considered it. But then someone who's never written a line of code told me I should leave technology decisions to people who understand technology. The irony was perfect. Marcus had spent 3 years positioning himself as the technical visionary while dismissing me as a passive investor. Now the board was learning that he understood about as much about our technology as a random person on the street. The emergency meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, I announced. I'll be presenting a comprehensive review of intellectual property ownership, technical contributions, and future development roadmap. Anyone who's interested in understanding what actually makes this company valuable is welcome to attend. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Marcus? The next time you want to explain technology to someone, you might want to start by learning what an algorithm actually does. The door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving Marcus to face a room full of investors who now understood that their golden boy knew absolutely nothing about the technology that made their investment valuable. As I walked through the hallway toward my office, I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Tech Global's acquisition team. They were eager to discuss terms for a direct purchase of my patents. The preliminary numbers they'd mentioned were staggering, enough to make the $100 million Marcus had negotiated look like pocket change. But selling wasn't necessarily my goal. I'd spent 12 years developing this technology, and I wasn't ready to hand it over to a corporation that might not appreciate its full potential. What I wanted was recognition, respect, and most importantly, control over the work that had consumed more than a decade of my life. My office was exactly as I'd left it that morning. 2 whiteboards covered in mathematical equations, 3 monitors displaying real-time system performance data, and shelves lined with technical manuals and research papers. This was where the real work happened. This was where innovations were born. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The same battered ThinkPad that had witnessed every breakthrough, every late-night debugging session, every moment of inspiration that led to our current success. Marcus had always encouraged me to upgrade to something more professional-looking, but I preferred tools that prioritized function over form. My email inbox was full of messages. 3 from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the board meeting drama. 5 from potential investors interested in discussing partnerships. And 1 from my patent attorney confirming that all my intellectual property filings were secure and up to date. The last message was from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, my former PhD advisor at MIT. She'd been following Innovate Tech's progress and wanted to congratulate me on the recent innovations in predictive analytics. Her message included a link to a research paper that mentioned my work as a breakthrough in applied machine learning. I smiled reading her words. Dr. Chen understood the technical complexity of what I'd accomplished. She appreciated the mathematical elegance of algorithms that could process millions of variables and generate accurate predictions about complex business scenarios. She recognized the years of work that went into developing technology that Marcus dismissed as technical minutiae. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Patricia Williams stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined. Julia, do you have a few minutes? I think we need to talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Patricia had been one of our earliest board members, invested not just financially but emotionally in the company's success. She'd also been one of the few people who consistently asked about the technical side of our products. That was quite a revelation in there, she said, settling into the chair. I have to admit, I never realized the extent of your technical contributions. Most people don't, I replied. Marcus has been very effective at positioning himself as the technology expert while keeping me in the background. Patricia was quiet for a moment, studying the equations on my whiteboards. Julia, can I ask you something directly? Are you planning to leave the company? It was a fair question. After 3 years of watching Marcus take credit for my work, the temptation to walk away was strong. Tech Global's offer would set me up financially for life, and I could start fresh with a new company where my contributions would be properly recognized from the beginning. I haven't decided, I said honestly. It depends on whether this board is willing to acknowledge reality, or if they prefer to continue living in Marcus's fantasy, where he's the technical genius. The patents are pretty conclusive evidence, Patricia said, but I'm concerned about the company's future. If you and Marcus can't work together. Patricia, let me be clear about something. I've never had a problem working with Marcus. The problem is Marcus's inability to work with me as an equal partner rather than a silent investor who should stay in her lane. I pulled up a document on my computer. For 3 years, I've been trying to implement advanced features that would keep us ahead of competitors. Marcus has blocked every proposal, claiming they're too complicated for our target market. The document showed a detailed technical roadmap for features that would revolutionize predictive analytics, real-time learning algorithms, adaptive neural networks, quantum computing integration, innovations that could establish InnovateTech as the undisputed leader in artificial intelligence applications. These features would triple our market value, I explained. But Marcus refuses to support development because he doesn't understand the technology well enough to sell it to clients. Patricia studied the roadmap carefully. This is incredibly sophisticated. How long would implementation take? With proper resources? 18 months for the full suite. But I'd need complete technical authority. No more having my recommendations overruled by someone who thinks machine learning is too complicated for business applications. What would you need from the board? I'd been thinking about this question for months. Recognition as Chief Technology Officer with final authority over all technical decisions. A development budget appropriate for the innovations we're planning. And Marcus either accepts a reduced role focused purely on sales, or he can find another company to misrepresent his expertise to. Patricia nodded slowly. Those seem like reasonable requests, given what we learned today. After she left, I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing patent filings and technical documentation. Every algorithm, every innovation, every breakthrough that made InnovateTech valuable could be traced back to my work. Marcus had contributed sales presentations and marketing materials, but the core technology that generated our revenue existed entirely because of my expertise. The next morning brought a steady stream of board members to my office. David Kim wanted to understand the technical roadmap. Robert Chen asked detailed questions about patent protection and intellectual property licensing. Even some of our major investors scheduled calls to discuss the company's future direction. Everyone, it seemed, was suddenly very interested in understanding the technology they'd been investing in for 3 years. Marcus was notably absent from these conversations. According to his assistant, he'd called in sick and wouldn't be in the office for the rest of the week, probably strategizing with lawyers about how to minimize the damage from his public humiliation. On Thursday, I received a formal letter from Marcus's attorney. It claimed that the patents should be considered joint intellectual property since they were developed while we were business partners. The legal argument was weak. The timestamps clearly showed that most of the technology predated our partnership. But it confirmed that Marcus was planning to fight, rather than accept reality. I forwarded the letter to my own attorney with a note. Please prepare a comprehensive response documenting the timeline of intellectual property development. Include all relevant email records, code repositories, and technical documentation that establish sole ownership. By Friday, the emergency board meeting had been rescheduled for the following Monday. Marcus's legal maneuvering had convinced the board that they needed to thoroughly review all intellectual property claims before making any decisions about company leadership. That was fine with me. The more closely they examined the evidence, the clearer it would become that Marcus's contributions were purely superficial, while mine formed the foundation of everything valuable about Innovatech. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched my mood as I prepared for what would likely be a contentious board meeting. I had spent the weekend compiling a comprehensive presentation that documented every aspect of my technical contributions, from the original research papers that inspired our algorithms to the most recent innovations that kept us ahead of competitors. The boardroom was packed when I arrived. All 7 board members, both company attorneys, Marcus looking uncomfortable in an expensive suit, and a technical consultant the board had hired to evaluate our intellectual property claims. Before we begin, announced Board Chairman David Kim, I want to establish that today's meeting is focused purely on factual review of technical contributions and intellectual property ownership. We're not here to assign blame or make emotional arguments. Marcus shifted in his seat. He'd clearly been hoping for a forum where he could charm the board with his sales skills rather than defend his technical claims with evidence. Julia, would you please present your documentation? I opened my laptop and began the presentation I had spent years preparing in my head, even if I'd only put it together over the weekend. The evidence was overwhelming. Patent after patent, all filed under my name. Thousands of lines of original code, all documented with my digital signatures. Research papers and technical publications, all citing my innovations as breakthrough developments in machine learning. The technical consultant took extensive notes, occasionally asking for clarification about specific algorithms or development timelines. His questions demonstrated a deep understanding of computer science that made Marcus visibly uncomfortable. Ms. Martinez, the consultant said during a break, the sophistication of this work is remarkable. The mathematical complexity alone would require years of specialized training. How long did you spend developing these algorithms? The foundation was laid during my doctoral research, I replied, but the commercial applications took approximately 8 years of full-time development. Marcus couldn't stay silent any longer. This is all very impressive, but it ignores the business development that made commercialization possible. Technology without market strategy is worthless. The consultant looked at Marcus with interest. Mr. Chen, could you describe your specific contributions to the technical development process? Marcus stammered through a response about user interface design and client feedback integration. Valuable contributions? Certainly, but hardly the kind of foundational work that justified his claims to technical leadership. And the core algorithms? The consultant pressed. What role did you play in their development? Marcus's face flushed. I provided strategic guidance about commercial applications. Strategic guidance, the consultant repeated. Could you explain the mathematical basis for any of the predictive models? Silence. Marcus stared at the table, finally confronted with the undeniable reality that he understood virtually nothing about the technology that made our company valuable. The board voted unanimously to restructure the company with me as Chief Technology Officer and sole owner of all intellectual property licensing rights. Marcus would retain a position as Vice President of Sales, but with no authority over technical decisions or product development. As board members filed out of the conference room, Marcus approached me with an expression I'd never seen before. Humility. Julia, I owe you an apology. I got caught up in the success and forgot who made it possible. I looked at him for a long moment. Marcus, I don't need an apology. I need a partner who respects expertise and recognizes contributions. If you can do that, we can build something amazing together. If not, Tech Global is still interested in acquiring my patents." He nodded slowly. "I understand. It won't happen again." 6 months later, Innovatech released the advanced features I'd been developing for years. The market response was overwhelming. Our client base tripled, our revenue increased by 400%, and 3 major tech publications featured our innovations as breakthrough developments in artificial intelligence. Marcus, to his credit, focused on what he did best: building client relationships and presenting our technology in terms that business leaders could understand. He never again questioned my technical decisions or suggested that I should leave technology to the experts. And when reporters asked about the company's remarkable growth, Marcus always made sure to credit the brilliant innovations of our chief technology officer. Finally, the right person was getting credit for the right work. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's simply forcing them to acknowledge the truth they've been trying to hide. In a world where technical expertise often gets overshadowed by smooth sales presentations, there's something deeply satisfying about proving that innovation, not manipulation, creates lasting value. The patents remain in my name. The technology continues to evolve under my direction, and Marcus has learned that understanding technology means more than being able to pronounce artificial intelligence in client meetings. It turns out that when you actually know what you're talking about, you don't need to silence other people to prove your expertise. You just need to let your work speak for itself. The Sterling Grand Hotel hadn't changed in 15 years. Same crystal chandeliers, same Persian carpets, same judgmental whispers echoing off marble walls. I stood in the lobby, invitation card rolling between my fingers, watching the city's elite filter into the annual Madison Prep reunion. "Ms. Alexandra Crawford?" The concierge approached with practiced deference. "The Wellington Ballroom is ready for you." I smiled, noting how different that deference felt now compared to when I was just James Crawford's rebellious daughter. "Thank you. I'll wait a moment." My phone buzzed. A message from my executive assistant. "Financial Times confirms tomorrow's cover. Market reaction already trending. CNBC wants an exclusive." Perfect timing. 15 years ago, I'd walked these same floors in a borrowed dress, listening to my classmates brag about their family legacies and trust funds. The Crawford name meant something then. Old money, old connections, old expectations. Until I broke them all. "Oh my God, Alex." A shrill voice cut through my thoughts. "You actually came." Melanie Porter Hampton, former class president and current social climber extraordinaire, air-kissed my cheeks. Her eyes swept over my Channel suit with the same calculating assessment she'd once used to judge everyone's prom dresses. "We weren't sure you'd show," she continued, voice dripping honey-coated venom. "Given everything that happened with your family's situation." Ah, yes. The situation. When I'd rejected my father's demands to join the family investment firm, choosing instead to start my own company. When I'd sold my trust fund shares to fund my first startup, causing a scandal that still echoed through country club corridors. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied smoothly. "How's Thomas's hedge fund doing?" Her smile flickered. Everyone knew her husband's fund had lost half its value in the last quarter, just like they knew he'd been quietly begging for investors at every social event this season. "Managing," she said tightly. "But enough about us. How's your, what do you call it, that little online business?" Before I could answer, more familiar faces approached. William Street Clare, whose father had cut me off from family investments when I went solo. Catherine Aldridge Ross, who told everyone I was having a mental breakdown when I sold my Upper East Side apartment to fund my second venture. Alex Crawford, back from exile. William's laugh carried across the marble floors. Still playing entrepreneur? I took a slow sip of champagne, remembering similar mockery from years ago. The difference was, this time I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to reveal everything. How is that going? Catherine leaned in. Perfume expensive and interest fake. We heard you were struggling? Daddy mentioned something about rejected loan applications. Of course he had. Richard Aldridge never got over me turning down a partnership at his bank. Actually, I smiled. Business is quite interesting at the moment. Oh, darling. Melanie's voice carried just enough to draw attention from nearby groups. You don't have to pretend with us. We all know startups are risky. There's no shame in admitting defeat. I'm sure Daddy would take you back at Crawford Investment Group. The growing circle of onlookers barely concealed their smirks. This was what they'd come for, the chance to see the prodigal daughter humbled, crawling back to the fold. Speaking of Crawford Investment, William cut in. James finally sold it, didn't he? After the market crash? Such a shame. But that's what happens when you trust the wrong people. The wrong people. He meant me, of course. They all blamed my departure for my father's eventual downfall, conveniently forgetting his risky investments and outdated strategies. Bill, I said quietly, using his childhood nickname. How's your family's shipping business? He stiffened. Managing. Really? Because I heard Docker Tech's new AI system is revolutionizing container tracking, making traditional methods obsolete. His face paled slightly. Docker Tech was my company's latest acquisition, a fact that wasn't public knowledge yet. Well, Melanie jumped in, clearly enjoying the tension. At least some of us maintained standards. Not everyone can handle real business, can they? Some people are better suited to smaller ventures. The ballroom had grown quieter, more people drifting toward our group. The show they'd been waiting for was starting. It's sweet that you keep trying, though, Catherine added with folk sympathy. Still chasing that dream of being independent. But really, Alex, isn't it time to be realistic? Join something stable? I checked my watch. The waiter should be arriving any moment. You know what they say, Melanie continued, warming to her audience. You can't fight legacy. We all end up exactly where we're meant to be. Some of us, she gestured to the gathered elite, at the top. And others. Miss Crawford? Right on cue, the waiter appeared with a silver tray. Today's Financial Times, as requested. I accepted the paper with a quiet thank you, aware of every eye in the circle watching. The front page faced down against the tray. Oh, keeping up with the markets? William smirked. Planning your next small venture? I turned the paper over slowly, letting them all see the cover. My portrait, professional and powerful, above the headline. Alexander Curwford, ENTUREQRENUR of the year. How one woman built a $12 billion tech empire in secret. The silence was absolute. Melanie's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on marble. Catherine's carefully maintained smile cracked. William looked like he'd been slapped. You were saying something about legacy? I asked softly. About ending up where we're meant to be. The article continued below my photo. Crawford Technologies' revolutionary AI systems have quietly dominated market sectors from shipping to banking. with over 70% of major financial institutions now running on their platforms. Sources confirm upcoming IPO could value the company at over $20 billion. That's impossible, William stammered. Your father said. My father didn't know? I cut in. None of you did. That was the point. I let them digest that as I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages. Actually, I was recording their reactions. A little gift for my PR team, who'd orchestrated this moment down to the last detail. But the loans. Catherine's voice had lost its condescending edge. Daddy said you were begging for financing. Your father, I smiled, like everyone else, saw exactly what I wanted them to see. It's amazing how much you can accomplish when people underestimate you. The whispers had started. Phones were coming out as people Googled my name, finding the carefully timed press releases that had just gone live. The truth about who really controlled the technology revolutionizing their family businesses. Now, I continued, enjoying the way they flinched at my voice about that small venture of mine. The night was young, and I hadn't even shown them everything yet. After all, the magazine cover was just the beginning. The Wellington ballroom buzzed with barely contained chaos. The same people who'd been smirking at my failure minutes ago were now frantically typing on their phones, discovering just how deep my success ran. Docker Tech, mainframe systems, quantum finance, William muttered, scrolling through his phone. You own all of them. Technically, I replied, accepting a fresh glass of champagne. Crawford Technologies owns them. I just own Crawford Technologies. Catherine's husband, a junior partner at Goldman Sachs, pushed through the crowd. Alex, we should talk, privately, about potential partnerships. Like the partnership your firm rejected last year. I smiled. When you said my proposal was amateur at best. He paled. That rejection had cost Goldman billions in potential revenues. Their competitors, who had signed with my company, were now dominating the AI-driven trading market. My phone buzzed again. A message from Marcus, my head of acquisitions. Street Claire shipping stock down 12% in after-hours trading. Investors connecting the dots about Docker Tech. Want me to proceed with the takeover? I typed back a quick hold. No need to crush William's family business tonight. That could wait until Monday. Alexandra. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. We need to talk. Richard Aldridge, Catherine's father and CEO of First Manhattan Bank, stood before me. The same man who'd laughed me out of his office 3 years ago when I'd approached him about modernizing their banking software. About what, Richard? About how First Manhattan's trading platform is now obsolete? Or about how your competitors are using my company's AI to outperform you 10 to 1? His face reddened. You deliberately misled us. No, I corrected him calmly. I offered you a chance to be part of the future. You chose to see what you wanted to see. A failed social playing entrepreneur. That was your mistake, not my deception. Melanie, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly found her voice. But your father, after the crash, you let everyone think. I let everyone think exactly what they assumed. I cut in. That I was desperate, broken, asking for loans I didn't need from banks that didn't matter. It's amazing how much people reveal when they think they have the upper hand. The screens around the ballroom, meant to show nostalgic photos from our prep school days, flickered to life. A series of business headlines began scrolling. Crawford Technologies revolutionizes banking security. AI giant acquires Docker Tech in stealth move. Tech's most mysterious CEO finally revealed. My PR team had perfect timing. "You've been planning this," William accused. "All of it. The reveal, the timing." "Of course I have." I met his eyes steadily. "Just like you all planned every snide remark, every closed door, every whispered rumor about my failures. The difference is, my plans actually worked." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Janet, my chief legal officer. Board memo leaked. First Manhattan considering emergency weekend session. "Want me to send the acquisition proposal now?" I smiled faintly. Richard must have missed that detail in the Financial Times article. The part about Crawford Technologies having enough cash reserves to acquire his bank outright. "Mr. Streetclair?" A young analyst pushed through the crowd, phone pressed to his ear. "Sir, the Hong Kong office is calling. Something about our shipping contracts being invalidated." William's face went from red to white. "What?" "Docker Tech's new terms of service," I explained. "They take effect at midnight. Didn't anyone read the fine print?" The room erupted in fresh chaos. More phones ringing, more urgent whispers. These people were finally realizing that while they'd been mocking my small business, I'd built something that could make or break their family fortunes with a single policy change. "Why?" Catherine's voice cracked slightly. "Why do it this way? Why not just tell everyone from the beginning?" I turned to her, remembering all the times she'd excluded me from charity boards and social committees after my breakdown. "Because you all needed to learn something. Success isn't inherited, it's built. And sometimes, it's built in silence while people like you are making noise." "Alexandra." Another voice, older, commanding. "Bernard Wellington AOI, our old headmaster and current board member of half the companies I now controlled. This is unprecedented." "No," I corrected him. "This is overdue. For every girl you told to think smaller, dream safer, stay in her lane. For every innovation you dismissed because it didn't come from the right family or the right background." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. My phone lit up with a message from my executive assistant. "CNBC anchor waiting. Live interview in 20 minutes?" I checked my watch. Right on schedule. Now, I addressed the room. "If you'll excuse me, I have a business to run." Several, actually. As I turned to leave, Melanie grabbed my arm. "Wait, what happens now? To all of us?" I looked at her perfectly manicured hand, then back at her face. "That depends. On Monday, Crawford Technologies begins implementing its new partnership standards. Companies that align with our values will thrive. The others," I shrugged. "Well, there's always your family names to fall back on." "Oh, wait." The silence that followed me to the door was sweeter than any revenge I could have planned. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about power. Who really had it? Who only pretended to have it? And who had been quietly building it all along? Outside, my driver held the door to a sleek Maybach. Not the flashiest car in Manhattan, but certainly the most expensive. As we pulled away from the Sterling Grand, I opened my laptop to review the next phase of acquisitions. The reunion had been just the beginning. Monday would bring the real fireworks, and I hadn't even revealed my biggest move yet. The Sunday headlines rolled in like thunder before a storm. Tech's hidden giant. Crawford Technologies, set to dominate market. Wall Street stunned by stealth success of Madison Prep alum. First Manhattan Bank calls emergency board meeting. Streetclair shipping stock plummets in pre-market trading. I sat in my penthouse office, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold. The same view I'd had when I started this journey, back when the penthouse was my only asset and Crawford Technologies was just 3 people working out of a converted storage room. The CNBC interview has 2 million views already, my PR director Sarah reported. Social media is exploding. #Crawford takeover is trending. And the other matter? She smiled. Your father's assistant called. He's demanding a meeting. Of course he was. James Crawford, the man who told me I was throwing away generations of legacy when I started my company, would be watching his carefully constructed world unravel. Schedule it, I said, for after the morning announcements. My phone buzzed. A message from Melanie. Alex, please. Thomas's fund is already down 30%. We can work something out. I archived it without replying. Let her feel the same desperation she'd enjoyed watching in others. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Crawford Technologies' new partnership terms went live. The requirements were simple but revolutionary: complete transparency in business practices, ethical AI implementation, and a minimum 30% diversity quota in executive positions. Companies had until Friday to comply or lose access to our systems. The market reaction was instant. Companies that had sneered at my small business were now watching their stock prices swing wildly based on whether they met Crawford Tech standards. Ms. Crawford, my assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your father is here. He wouldn't wait. I straightened my Armani blazer. Send him in. James Crawford had aged since I'd last seen him. His hair was grayer, his stance less commanding, but his eyes still held that same mix of arrogance and anger. What have you done? He demanded without preamble. Built something. I replied calmly. Isn't that what you always wanted? Built something? You've destroyed relationships that took generations to establish. William's father called me in tears. Richard Aldridge is facing a board revolt. Fascinating how quickly generations of relationships crumble when the power dynamic shifts. He slammed his hands on my desk. This isn't how business is done. No, I agreed. This is how business should be done. Transparent, meritocratic, forward-thinking. You've made enemies of everyone who could have helped you. I pulled up a screen showing Crawford Technologies' market valuation. The number made him step back. I don't need their help, Dad. I never did. That's what you never understood. While you were all protecting your little circle of influence, the world changed. I just changed with it. And now what? He demanded. You'll destroy everything we built. No, I'll rebuild it. Better, stronger, more equitable. I stood, meeting his gaze. The acquisition offer for Crawford Investment Group is still open, by the way. Though after today's market shift, I might need to adjust the price. Down. His face reddened. You wouldn't dare. Actually, I already have. Check your email. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. The color drained from his face as he read the updated offer. 40% lower than last week's valuation. You can't. I can. I did. And on Friday, when our new standards take effect, it'll be worth even less. I walked to the window. Unless, of course, you implement the changes I've outlined, starting with the board composition. He stared at me, finally seeing what everyone else had missed all these years. I hadn't just built a company. I'd built a revolution. The car will take you back to your office, I said, effectively dismissing him. You have until Friday to decide. After he left, I opened my laptop to join the emergency board meeting of First Manhattan Bank. as their newest major shareholder, a position I'd acquired through a series of shell companies. I had some suggestions about their future direction. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Catherine. Just heard about Mom's foundation. Please. We can explain. Ah, yes, the foundation. I'd almost forgotten about my team's audit of their charitable giving. The irregularities they'd found would make fascinating reading for the IRS. The afternoon brought a parade of former critics turned supplicants. William's father, begging to maintain their shipping contracts. Melanie's husband, offering inside information about competitor funds. Each one trying to save themselves from the tsunami they dismissed as a ripple. At 4:00 p.m., I had one last meeting. The Madison Prep Board of Trustees had requested an urgent discussion about their technology education program. Apparently, they'd heard about Crawford Technology's new educational foundation, the one planning to fund tech scholarships for girls from underprivileged backgrounds. The same program they'd rejected when I'd proposed it 15 years ago. Miss Crawford? My assistant appeared. The trustees are here, and there's something else. She handed me a tablet showing a live feed from the Sterling Grand. The reunion was supposed to continue through tomorrow, but the ballroom was empty. The elite who'd gathered to celebrate their status had scattered, too busy salvaging their empires to maintain social appearances. I smiled, remembering all the parties I'd been excluded from, all the whispers about the Crawford girl who'd lost her way. Your next interview is in an hour, Sarah reminded me. Bloomberg wants to discuss the IPO. Push it to tomorrow, I decided. Tonight, I have other plans. I took the elevator to the ground floor, nodding to the security team as I crossed the lobby. Outside, the evening was painting the city in shades of purple and gold. My driver opened the door to the Maybach. Where to, Miss Crawford? I gave him an address, one I hadn't visited in years. The small apartment where I'd started coding my first program, where I'd eaten ramen noodles while building the foundation of what would become Crawford Technologies. Taking a trip down memory lane? Sarah asked. No, I smiled. Picking up something for tomorrow's press conference. In my bag was the original business plan, written on cheap notebook paper, along with every rejection letter, every dismissive email, every condescending response I'd received. Tomorrow, they would become part of the Crawford Technologies Museum exhibit, a reminder that success doesn't always wear a familiar face. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from the Financial Times editor. Follow-up story confirmed. How Crawford Technologies is reshaping global business runs tomorrow. Front page again. I put the phone away, watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere out there, my former classmates were realizing that their world had changed forever. The social hierarchy they defended so fiercely had been rewritten. And I, the girl they'd written off as a failure, had done the rewriting. Success, I whispered to the city skyline, is the best revenge. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about change. Real, lasting, systemic change. And I was just getting started. My phone buzzed with another vendor confirmation as I reviewed the final invoice details for tonight's event. Moonrise Manor had outdone themselves with the floral arrangements, exactly as I'd specified when I signed the contract 6 months ago. The crystal chandeliers cast perfect light across the reception hall, illuminating 300 guests who had no idea they were celebrating in a venue I owned through my hospitality investment portfolio. I'm Catherine Morrison, though most people here still think of me as little Katie, who used to follow her older siblings around. At 31, I spent the last 12 years building Morrison Hospitality Group from a single restaurant investment into a network of premium venues across 3 states. But tonight, I wasn't here as a CEO. I was here as family, watching my cousin Derek marry his college sweetheart in what everyone assumed was just another expensive wedding venue. The irony wasn't lost on me. When Derek had called 8 months ago, panicked because his original venue had double booked, I'd quietly arranged for Moonrise Manor to have a last-minute cancellation. The booking fee alone could have covered a luxury car, but family was family. Even family that had spent years treating me like I was still the awkward teenager who chose business school over sorority life. Julia approached my table near the back, her champagne flute already half empty despite the reception starting only an hour ago. At 35, she perfected the art of looking elegant while radiating disapproval. Tonight's target seemed to be my choice to sit quietly, rather than mingle with her circle of pharmaceutical sales executives. "Katie," she said, settling into the chair beside me without invitation. "You look nice." The pause said everything. My simple black cocktail dress, understated jewelry, and practical heels clearly didn't meet her standards for a family celebration. Julia had always believed that success was measured by how much you spent on looking successful, a philosophy that worked well for someone married to a surgeon, but less well for building actual wealth. "Thank you," I replied, checking my phone as another message came in from my property manager. 3 more venue bookings for next month, including 2 corporate events that would bring in serious revenue. The ceremony was beautiful. Derek looked happy. "Yes, well, happiness doesn't pay the bills," Julia said, swirling her champagne. "Speaking of which, I heard you finally moved out of that apartment complex downtown. Aunt Margaret said you bought something in the suburbs." I smiled slightly. The something in the suburbs was a custom-built home on 15 acres. But I'd learned long ago that explaining my actual financial situation to Julia only led to accusations of showing off or lying. Better to let family assume what they wanted to assume. "Something like that," I said. The band finished their current song, and Derek's new father-in-law approached the microphone to give a toast. Robert Chen had made his fortune in tech startups, and his speech was polished, warm, and mercifully brief. As applause filled the room, I noticed Julia checking her phone, probably coordinating with our mother about something. Mom had been unusually quiet tonight, which typically meant she was planning something. At 62, Patricia Morrison still treated family gatherings like military campaigns, complete with strategic seating arrangements and carefully timed conversations designed to achieve maximum emotional impact. Tonight's campaign seemed focused on what she called Katie's situation. My situation in their minds was that I was 31, unmarried, and working in restaurants. They knew I'd started with a small investment in a local bistro, but the details of how that had grown into a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire remained conveniently overlooked. When you don't fit into family expectations, people tend to see only what confirms their existing beliefs. "Katie." My brother Michael appeared at our table, looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. At 28, he'd followed the approved family path. Law school, corporate job, marriage to another lawyer, house in the right neighborhood. "Mom wants to talk to you after the cake cutting." Julia's eyes lit up with anticipation. Whatever Mom had planned, my siblings were clearly in on it. I'd seen this dynamic before, usually at holidays when someone had decided it was time for another intervention about my life choices. "Of course," I said calmly. "Looking forward to it." Michael hesitated, probably expecting more resistance. "It's just that we're all worried about you. Working such long hours, not dating anyone seriously, living alone in that big house. So they did know about the house. Interesting. Someone had been doing research, which meant tonight's conversation would be more serious than usual. I wondered if they'd figured out who actually owned it, or if they just assumed I was renting something beyond my apparent means. The cake cutting proceeded with appropriate fanfare, followed by more dancing and the gradual migration of older guests toward the exit. By 10 o'clock, only about half the original crowd remained, mostly Derek's college friends and our extended family. Julia had switched from champagne to wine, which usually meant her filter was about to disappear entirely. I was reviewing emails when the music suddenly stopped. Julia stood near the band's setup, holding the wireless microphone with the confidence of someone who'd consumed just enough alcohol to believe everyone wanted to hear her thoughts. "Excuse me, everyone," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. "I know this is Derek and Amanda's special day, but I think it's important that we talk about what family really means." A murmur of confusion rippled through the remaining guests. Derek looked mortified. Amanda's parents exchanged concerned glances. This wasn't part of the planned program. "Family means supporting each other," Julia continued, swaying slightly. "Family means being honest about our shortcomings. And sometimes, family means acknowledging that some people here don't deserve to celebrate with real family." She was looking directly at me. Some people who've forgotten where they come from, who think they're better than everyone else because they bought a big house they can't actually afford, who sit in the back row like they don't belong here. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations died. Even the catering staff stopped moving. 200 people were now staring at me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being publicly humiliated at my cousin's wedding. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress, and walked calmly toward the back of the room. Not toward Julia, not toward the microphone, but toward the service area where I could make a phone call in relative privacy. My hands remained steady as I scrolled through my contacts, finding the number I needed. "Robert," I said when he answered on the second ring. "Sorry to bother you so late, but could you come to Moonrise Manor? There's a situation with one of the guests that requires the owner's attention." "On my way, boss," Robert Martinez replied. He'd been managing Moonrise Manor for 3 years, ever since I'd acquired the property and renovated it into the area's premier wedding venue. "Everything okay? Just need you to clarify some things for the guests. 5 minutes?" 3 minutes. I was in the office reviewing tomorrow's setup. I ended the call and returned to my table, where Julia was now explaining to the crowd how disappointed our parents were in my life choices, how I'd wasted my education, how I was embarrassing the family name, how my selfish decisions affected everyone who cared about me. Mom had joined her near the microphone, nodding along with appropriate maternal concern. Michael stood nearby, ready to provide backup support. Even some of our cousins were nodding, probably thinking about their own successful careers and stable relationships. 3 minutes later, Robert entered through the main doors, his suit impeccable despite the late hour. He surveyed the scene quickly, taking in Julia's impromptu speech and the awkward audience, then walked directly to me. "Ms. Morrison," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. "I got here as quickly as I could. How can I help?" The effect was immediate and total. Every conversation stopped. Julia's voice trailed off mid-sentence. The microphone slipped slightly in her hand as she processed what she just heard. "Thank you for coming, Robert," I said, standing to greet him. "I was hoping you could clarify something for our guests about the venue policies." "Of course, boss," What do you need? That second boss hit the room like a physical force. Julia's face went from flushed to pale in approximately 3 seconds. Mom's expression shifted from concern to confused to something approaching horror as the implications became clear. Actually, I said, looking around at my family's stunned faces, I think the clarification can wait. Why don't you go ahead and prepare tomorrow's sap? I'll handle things here. Robert nodded professionally. Let me know if you need anything else. The night security team is already in place, and I'll be in the office until midnight finishing the quarterly reports. As he left, the silence in the room became deafening. Julia still held the microphone, but no words were coming out. Derek and Amanda stood frozen by their cake table, probably wondering if their wedding reception had just turned into a family catastrophe. I walked slowly back toward the front of the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor that I'd personally selected during the renovation. Past the crystal chandeliers I'd chosen, past the custom millwork I'd commissioned, past family members who were beginning to understand that the little sister they'd been pitying owned the ground they were standing on. Julia, I said gently, extending my hand, can I have the microphone back? She handed it over wordlessly, her eyes wide with something between shock and mortification. I looked out at the crowd, taking in the faces of relatives who'd spent years assuming I was struggling, friends who'd heard Julia's speech, and were now recalculating everything they thought they knew about family dynamics. I want to thank everyone for celebrating Derek and Amanda's wedding with us tonight. I began, my voice calm and warm. Moonrise Manor has hosted hundreds of celebrations over the past 3 years, but tonight was especially meaningful because it was family. I paused, letting that sink in. Family gatherings are interesting things. They remind us where we came from, who shaped us, and sometimes they show us how far we've traveled from those beginnings. Tonight, my sister shared some concerns about my life choices, and I appreciate her honesty. Julia was now staring at her feet, probably calculating how much damage control would be needed. She's right that I did buy a house I can't afford. The mortgage payment is 0 because I paid cash. She's also right that I work long hours in restaurants. When you own 15 of them across 3 states, the hours can be challenging. The murmur that went through the crowd was audible now. Math was being recalculated. Assumptions were crumbling. But most importantly, she's right about family. Family does mean supporting each other, being honest about our shortcomings, and acknowledging when we've made mistakes. I looked directly at Julia, who was now visibly shaking. The mistake here isn't that someone doesn't deserve to celebrate with family. The mistake is that family members can spend years making assumptions about each other without ever asking the right questions. I handed the microphone back to the band leader and returned to my table. Around me, conversation slowly resumed, but the energy had completely shifted. Small groups formed as people processed what had just happened. Derek approached with Amanda, both looking concerned. Katie, Derek said quietly, I had no idea. About the venue, about your business. I'm so sorry about Julia. Don't apologize for your wedding, I smiled. This is your day. Julia and I can work things out later. Amanda squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, the venue is absolutely perfect. Robert and his team have been incredible to work with. After they left, I noticed Mom approaching slowly, her face showing the kind of careful calculation that meant she was trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Michael followed a few steps behind, clearly uncomfortable. Katie, Mom said, settling into the chair beside me. We need to talk. I know. 15 restaurants. Really? 17. Actually, I just closed on 2 more properties last week. She absorbed this information, probably running through years of family conversations where she'd expressed concern about my career prospects. Why didn't you tell us? I considered several responses, all of them true, because you never asked, because you'd already decided what my life looked like, because every time I tried to share good news, someone changed the subject to when I was getting married. Because I learned early that success makes some people uncomfortable, I said instead, it was easier to let you assume what you wanted to assume. Michael finally joined us, looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. I called the office this week, he said quietly, to check on some real estate investments. Morrison Hospitality Group came up in the search. I know. My assistant mentioned that someone with our last name had been asking questions. Your assistant said you were in Europe, finalizing acquisition deals. London and Paris, 2 boutique hotels that came on the market. I got back yesterday. The weight of their assumptions was becoming clear. While they'd been worrying about my financial stability, I'd been building an international portfolio. While they'd been planning interventions about my life choices, I'd been making decisions that affected hundreds of employees across multiple countries. Katie, Mom said carefully, I think we owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, but you might want to think about how you talk to people before understanding their situations. Julia appeared at our table, having apparently worked up the courage to face the aftermath of her speech. Her earlier confidence had been replaced by something approaching devastation. Katie, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything tonight. This is Derek's wedding. Let's focus on that. But I humiliated you in front of everyone. You humiliated yourself, Julia. I'm fine. She sat down heavily, probably realizing that her public critique of my life had backfired spectacularly. The sister she'd been pitying was now revealed as the most successful person in the room, and everyone had witnessed the reversal. How long have you owned this place? 3 years. I bought it when the previous owners were struggling with debt. Robert's been managing it since then. And you arranged for Derek to book it? I may have influenced the availability. The reception was winding down now, with most guests having departed during the family drama. Derek and Amanda were saying goodbye to the remaining relatives, probably eager to escape to their honeymoon and leave the Morrison family dysfunction behind. As the evening ended, I found myself standing alone in the empty reception hall, watching the catering staff clean up under Robert's supervision. The crystal chandeliers still cast perfect light, the flowers still looked stunning, and the marble floor still gleamed. But the atmosphere had completely changed. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Thank you for everything. Tonight, the venue, and for handling Julia with more class than she deserved. Another message came in from my attorney, confirming that tomorrow's hotel acquisition in Chicago had been approved. $25 million for a boutique property that would anchor our Midwest expansion. The kind of deal that happened while family members were assuming I was struggling to pay rent. Robert approached as the last of the catering equipment was loaded onto trucks. Everything secure for the night, boss. Tomorrow's wedding setup starts at 8. Thanks, Robert. Any issues with tonight's guests? He smiled diplomatically. Nothing we haven't handled before. Family dynamics can be complicated. That's one way to put it. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about Julia's words. Some people don't deserve to celebrate with real family. She'd been right, in a way. Some people don't deserve certain things, but not because of their financial status or life choices, because of how they treat others when they think they have power over them. The next morning brought a stack of messages from various family members. Apologies, explanations, requests for coffee meetings to clear the air. Julia had apparently spent the night calling relatives to explain her side of the story, which only made things worse as people realized how badly she'd misjudged the situation. Mom's message was the most direct. "Can we please have lunch this week? I think we have a lot to discuss." I replied to her and ignored the others. Some conversations were worth having. Others were just damage control. 3 weeks later, I sat in Mom's kitchen drinking coffee and reviewing the final contracts for our Seattle expansion. She'd spent the time since the wedding asking careful questions about my business, clearly trying to understand how the daughter she'd been worried about had become more successful than anyone in the family. "I keep thinking about that night," she said, refilling my cup. "How wrong we were about everything." "You weren't wrong about everything, just about some important things." Julia's been struggling since then. The pharmaceutical company laid off half their sales team last month. I'd heard Julia's husband was also facing potential malpractice issues related to a patient care incident. The perfect life she'd been projecting was apparently less perfect than anyone realized. "I'm sorry to hear that. She wants to apologize properly, face to face. She can call me when she's ready." 6 months after Derek's wedding, Julia finally made that call. We met at one of my restaurants, a farm-to-table place in the arts district that had become popular with young professionals. She looked older, less polished, more genuine than I'd seen her in years. "I spent months being angry," she said over our appetizers. "Angry that you'd let us all look like fools. Angry that you hadn't told us the truth about your success. And now I realize I was angry at myself for being the kind of person who would attack family in public, for making assumptions about your life without ever asking about it." We talked for 2 hours, covering years of family dynamics, missed connections, and mutual misunderstandings. For the first time since we were children, Julia seemed interested in my actual life rather than her version of it. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we finished dessert. "Of course. When you were building all this, the restaurants, the venues, the success, did you ever think about proving us wrong?" I considered the question carefully. Honestly, no. I was too busy building something to spend much time thinking about what other people thought of it. Even when we were dismissive, even when we acted like you were failing, especially then, other people's opinions don't pay employees or satisfy customers. As we left the restaurant, Julia paused at the entrance. "Derek and Amanda's first anniversary is coming up. They're planning a small celebration." "That's nice. At Moonrise Manor. I think they like having family events where they know the owner will take good care of them." I smiled. "Robert runs a good operation. Would you consider letting me help with the planning?" I promised not to grab any microphones. "Talk to Robert. If he needs extra help coordinating, I'm sure he'd appreciate it." A year later, Julia had become our unofficial family event coordinator, working closely with Robert to manage Morrison family celebrations. She discovered she had genuine talent for hospitality planning, and I discovered that my sister was actually likable when she wasn't busy judging everyone around her. The family dynamic had shifted permanently. People asked about my business now, showed genuine interest in my projects, treated me like the successful adult I'd become rather than the struggling younger sister they'd assumed I was. Even Derek had started consulting with me about his own investment decisions. But the most important change was simpler than any of that. When I walked into family gatherings now, I wasn't the person who didn't deserve to be there. I was the person who made sure everyone else had a place to belong. Success isn't just about building wealth or acquiring properties. It's about building the kind of life where you can be generous with others, even when they haven't been generous with you. It's about having the confidence to remain calm when people attack you publicly, because you know who you are and what you've accomplished. And sometimes, it's about owning the venue where your family finally learns to see you clearly.